Chapter 119. The restaurant was so quiet that they could hear Amy gulp down the tofu pudding. The sweet tofu pudding is delicious too. Amy opened her eyes and said happily. She scooped another spoonful of tofu pudding into her mouth, one spoonful after another. She couldn't stop, and her little face was full of joy. If that's the case, which one do you like more? Meg raised his eyebrows. Amy's expression was almost the same when she ate the sweet tofu pudding and the savory tofu pudding. But come to think of it, Amy's expression was almost the same when she ate the Yeongju fried rice and rujiamo for the first time. She was completely intoxicated by the delicious food, and the pure smile on her face made her delicate little face look even cuter. After a while, Amy licked the bottom of her empty bowl and put it down reluctantly. Amy, do you think the savory tofu pudding is better or the sweet tofu pudding is better? Meg asked Amy with a smile. I think. Amy looked at Meg and Yabemia, who were looking at her nervously. She thought for a while and nodded. Both are good. The savory tofu pudding can be eaten with rujiamo. The savory tofu pudding makes the rujiamo even better. The sweet tofu pudding can be eaten after the savory tofu pudding and rujiamo. The sweet tofu pudding is just right for the end. I feel so satisfied and comfortable after eating it. Tofu pudding, both savory and sweet, is super delicious. Meg and Yabemia looked at each other helplessly. They had thought that Amy would be on their side, but Amy actually thought both were super delicious. Now they were on their side. The savory side and the sweet side were equally divided. If the savory side and the sweet side fought in the future, they would probably be closer to Amy. Mr. Mac, I'm Crassus. I have something to tell you. Can you let me in first? Just then, there was a knock on the door. It's Half-Beard Grandpa. Amy looked toward the door and said happily, Father, can you give Half-Beard Grandpa a helping of tofu pudding? I think he'll definitely like the sweet tofu pudding. He's so old, and most of his teeth must have fallen out. The soft tofu pudding won't take much effort to eat. I'll go open the door first. We haven't started selling the tofu pudding yet. Meg shook his head with a smile. He had just finished reading Crassus' information, and his hostility towards him had lessened a lot. The relationship between Crassus and the elven princess had made his mind a little more lively. Perhaps Crassus' identity would allow him to come into contact with some more secret information, which would be more reliable than the detective society that relied on blind guesses. Julian, why are you here? Just as Meg was about to open the door, Crassus' voice sounded from outside. He sounded surprised and angry. Julian was the name of the old magician of the magical potion shop next door. In the information that Sherlock had given him, it mentioned that Crassus and Julian might have a grudge against each other. Now, it seemed that the information was accurate. The two of them did know each other, and their grudge was probably not shallow. Crassus, I've been living here for almost 10 years. If you can be here, why can't I be here? Julian sneered. His voice was hoarse, like two rusty pieces of metal rubbing against each other. It was unbearable to listen to. That's right. That's right. Charcoal's voice rang out, and he chimed in. You hairless bird, call out one more time, and you'll be cooked. Crassus glanced at Charcoal and said calmly, but he was looking at Julian from the corner of his eye. He was angry and anxious. Why is this old thing here? Is he just here for a meal? Or is he interested in Amy's talent and wants to take her as his disciple? I'm not afraid of you, Charcoal said, but his voice was obviously lacking in confidence. He moved timidly to the back of the cage, closer to Julian. You have no right to teach my bird a lesson. Julian's voice was cold. He looked at Crassus with a gloomy gaze, and the surrounding temperature seemed to drop. I don't care who raised the fella I want to teach a lesson to. When the king was still the crown prince, I taught him a lot of lessons. Crassus also retorted with an imposing manner, and the air around them began to heat up. Ding dong. The bell rang. Meg opened the door, and Crassus and Julian turned their heads at the same time. If the two of you want to fight, please do it outside. The restaurant is still open for business later. It would be bad if the door was frozen or burned. Meg stood on the dividing line between the two as soon as he opened the door. He experienced the feeling of ice and fire, and looked at the two who were at daggers drawn, and shrugged helplessly. Crassus was still holding that tall staff in his hand, and his white magician robe was spotless. Julian was wearing a pitch-black magician's robe, holding a short magic wand in one hand and a birdcage in the other. Charcoal, who had 2 leaves covering his body, was hiding in a corner, trembling. Crassus and Julian looked at Meg in shock. With their status and power, even if they were to fight in front of the Rhodu Palace, the king might not dare to come out and ask them to fight further away to avoid damaging the palace gate. They didn't expect Meg to come out and ask them to fight further away instead of trying to stop them. This reason could be considered very fresh and refined. Crassus and Julian looked at each other. They hesitated for a moment, and then retracted their auras almost at the same time. Mr. Mac. The two of them looked at Meg, and spoke at the same time. Then, they stopped at the same time and stared at each other. Come in and talk. Meg looked at the two who were about to fight again, and said helplessly. It wasn't hard to guess their intentions. It seemed like Julian also wanted to take Amy as his disciple. All right. Crassus nodded, and entered the restaurant first. Millimeter Chem. Julian hesitated for a moment, and then nodded and followed him in. Meg closed the door and lowered the blinds at the same time. Since finding a magic teacher for Amy from Chaos School wouldn't work, he might as well try to get in touch with Crassus and Julian officially first. Crassus' resume could be said to be glorious. He was the only magic caster on the Norland continent who could use a magic caster's staff to kill a giant dragon. Although there wasn't much information on Julian, he dared to fight Crassus without losing out. It was clear that he wasn't weaker than Crassus, and he didn't seem to have anything to do with the Magus Tower. Crassus stopped in his tracks, and turned back to look at Julian seriously. Julian, you ruined my plan to take Irina as my disciple 20 years ago. If you still want to make trouble this time, I will smash your head into pieces even if I have to risk my life. 5th update, brothers, please subscribe. The rewards have already exceeded 3,000. 2 alliance leaders, 2 elders, and a lot of rewards. Thank you very much, and very excited. Happy New Year to everyone. Chapter 120. Hehe, Crassus, do you think I'm that stupid dragon? Don't ruin my plans this time. Otherwise, I'll seal you in ice again, Julian chuckled coldly in a bone-chilling voice. Irina. Meg raised an eyebrow as he murmured the name in his mind. He felt that this name was a little familiar, and his eyes suddenly lit up as he looked at the two of them who were about to draw their swords again. According to Crassus' information, 20 years ago was when he wanted to take the elven princess as his disciple, but the matter was left unsettled. However, judging from the current situation, this matter seemed to have something to do with Julian, so this Irina was very likely to be the elven princess. You're here, Black Coal. Where's Green Bean? Amy jumped down from her chair and looked at Black Coal with elation. Ugly Duckling glared at Black Coal and opened its mouth to meow, looking as if it was about to pounce on him. That guy is the laziest. He's still sleeping, Black Coal said with disdain. Charcoal said with a little disdain. He glanced at Crassus and took 2 steps back in fear. He had never seen such a terrifying old man. His whole body was emitting a dangerous aura. All right. Amy nodded before turning to look at Julian and Crassus, who were about to fight again. She was a little perplexed as she said, Grandpa Turtle, Grandpa Halfbeard, are you two going to fight? You can't do it in the restaurant. You have to be good. No, we're just chatting. Crassus immediately shook his head with a smile. His expression was as obedient as it could be. Julian hesitated momentarily before forcing a smile and nodding. Yes, we're not fighting. We're not fighting. Amy was a little disappointed. She tried to suggest, actually, if you want to fight, you can fight outside. That way, I can watch. Crassus and Julian were both speechless. Not only was this little girl not trying to stop them from fighting, she was even instigating them to fight just to watch the show. Her strange way of thinking reminded them of the same person. Back in the day, that little girl also liked to stir up trouble like this. She wanted them to fight all day long. Do you two have something to say? Meg asked as he stroked Amy's hair with a smile. Although he also wanted to watch the two great magic casters fight, it was clearly not the right time. If he guessed correctly, these two were most likely here for Amy. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so humble. Mr. Mac, I'm here today. I want to take Amy as my disciple. Seeing Mag frown, he quickly raised his hand and said, "Don't be in such a hurry to refuse. You said you don't want the little girl to leave your side, so I'll change my condition. She doesn't need to go to Rodu. I've decided to build a new magic lab in Chaos City and teach her magic here. I believe there are few teachers in Chaos City, or even the entire Norland continent, who are better than me. You want her to stay in Chaos City?" Meg's eyes lit up. Just as Crassus had said, he was most disgusted by Crassus' insistence on taking Amy back to the Magus Tower. However, if he could stay in Chaos City, then combined with the information he had received in the morning, there really weren't many magic casters on the entire Norland continent who were more powerful than Amy. Crassus was also quite elated to see Meg's expression change. After the past few days, he could tell that Meg's decision was the key. "Yes, but one of them happened to be here," Julian said in a leisurely manner. He looked at Meg and forced a smile onto his face as he said, "Mr. Mac, if you want Amy to learn magic from me, I have a ready-made magic room. She can start learning today. The materials for the magic room have to be shipped over from Rodu, so it'll take at least a month for it to be completed. During this month, I can give her a comprehensive understanding of magic, and she can learn at least 3 types of magic at the same time. This is a clear win for me. This condition." Meg stroked his chin with a thoughtful expression. In reality, he was already overjoyed. 2 great magic casters were trying to promote themselves here in order to compete for a disciple. For a moment, one would think that 2 teachers from 2 different schools were competing for a high-quality student. The magic room isn't a problem at all. The requirements for a magic room for beginners don't need to be too high. I just have to inform the Grey Temple, and I can borrow their magic casters to start teaching. Crassus waved his hand and pulled out a scroll from his pocket. He slowly unfurled it on the table and looked at Amy with a smile as he said, "Also, I've designed the new magic room for Amy. There's only one of its kind on the entire Norland continent. It'll be mainly purple, and there'll be swings, wooden horses, and other fun things. You can play with it when you're tired." "Wow, it looks so interesting." Amy walked up with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She looked at the beautiful magic room in the drawing. There were swings, wooden horses, and all kinds of interesting toys. The purple magic room was dotted with all kinds of little stars, and it looked so dreamy that her eyes lit up completely. Meg was also a little surprised to see that drawing. This was just a drawing to show the effects. He didn't expect that Crassus would put in so much effort just to take Amy as his disciple. He was a little surprised by how much importance he attached to the design. "What's the use of all these fancy things?" Julian poked his head out to take a look, and his expression was a little unnatural. He looked at Amy and said anxiously in his heart, "Old man Ku is so shameless. He came prepared. He used this trick many years ago, and I didn't expect him to use the same trick again. This little girl doesn't have Irina's knowledge. She won't be able to resist seeing these little things." His gaze landed on the birdcage in his hand, and his eyes lit up instantly. He looked at Amy with a smile, and said, "Amy, if you learn magic from me, then black coal and green pea will be yours. They can play with you every day and talk to you to relieve your boredom." "Wow. Old man, are you selling me out just like that? Little Amy has a cat." Black coal screamed, and jumped up and down in the cage anxiously. "Meow." Ugly Duckling bared its teeth at Black Coal with an eager expression. Black Coal was even more terrified. Although it was still a little guy, he wasn't sure if he could really beat it if they really fought. "I don't want it. Ugly Duckling is ugly enough, and Black Coal is even uglier. What if Amy becomes ugly because of their influence?" Amy looked at Black Coal with disdain. "That's right. Look at that bird. It's obviously not a good bird. If you like birds, Grandpa will go and catch a beautiful golden peacock for you tomorrow." Crassus was originally worried that Amy would be tempted, but after hearing what she said, he was immediately happy, and said proudly. Julian's expression froze, and he looked at Black Coal. It was bald all over, and it did look a little ugly with 2 leaves tied to its chest and back. However, he couldn't drop the ball at such a crucial moment. He laughed dryly, and said, "Although black coal is a little ugly, it can sing. It's really fun. Come, sing a few lines." "Really?" Amy looked at black coal with disbelief. In just half a day, the restaurant had already entered the premium category, and gave Qingyu a surprise for the beginning of the year. "Thank you very much." Before the restaurant went up for sale, it had already been agreed that there would be 10 updates. Qingyu would continue to write now, and she would publish them one by one in the evening. She would write 1 chapter, and update 1 chapter. The 10 chapters today weren't counted as updates, and she would like to thank everyone for their support. Today, there were 2 new alliance leaders, 1 sect leader, 1 elder, and 4 branch leaders. There were 17 more chapters to be updated today. Then, she would like to ask for monthly votes here. This month's monthly votes ranking was really very important to the restaurant. Furthermore, there were double monthly votes from the 1st to the 7th of this month. There were already more than 900 monthly votes now, and there were 3 more chapters to be updated. Chapter 121. The Honourable Fommer Odin Ben Highness will never sing. Charcoal raised his head, looking like he would rather die than submit. What kind of song can this stupid bird sing? Crassus had a mocking look on his face. It was rare to see his old rival being humiliated. Amy was also a little disappointed. She looked at the blueprint on the table again. "If you don't sing, I don't mind having an extra dish on the table tonight." Julian's voice suddenly became a lot colder, and he looked at Charcoal coldly. Charcoal shuddered. He immediately looked at Amy and said excitedly, "Dear Amy, what song do you want to hear? As long as you say it, I can sing it for you. And I can sing it very well." "Then can you sing The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms?" Amy tilted her head and thought for a moment, then looked at Charcoal and asked, Pick what?" Charcoal's voice was a little confused. He poked his head out of the cage and stared at Amy as he asked. "The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms," Amy answered seriously. Crassus looked at Charcoal. That song was probably the one sung by the little guy who could sing the other day. He had fallen for that song the last time. He heard Charcoal boasting solemnly just now, but now he looked like he had never heard the song before. He also had a gloating look on his face. Yarbemia stood at the side, a little puzzled. These 2 old men looked to be over 100 years old. Why were they so angry early in the morning? And why were they trying so hard to please little Amy? She really couldn't understand. Meg couldn't help but smile. Not many people in this world had heard of The Little Girl Who Picks Mushrooms. Of course, Charcoal couldn't possibly know how to sing it. Amy was really making things difficult for him. However, Amy only knew 2 songs. She didn't even remember the name of the other song. Charcoal was asking for trouble by asking her to choose a song. "What song is this? This song doesn't even exist in this world. This Highness has never heard of it." Charcoal's voice suddenly rose a lot, and he seemed to be a little flustered. "Stupid Charcoal, you were the one who told me to order whatever I wanted. Besides, my little person can sing. How can there not be any?" Remi looked at Charcoal with a serious expression on her little face as she lectured it in a serious manner. But this Highness." Charcoal was a little anxious. He stuck his head out, still wanting to argue. "Sing." Julian looked at Crassus's face. He looked at Charcoal's. His voice was as if it came from 1,000-year-old ice. The little girl who picks mushrooms, picked a big mushroom, 1 bite at a time, never thought it was too much. Charcoal shuddered and immediately opened his mouth to sing. His tone was passionate, and he sang a children's song with a tragic tone of going to war. Meg raised his eyebrows. Charcoal's voice sounded pretty good, but other than the first line, the rest of the lyrics were completely wrong. A little girl who was happy to share was forcibly sung as a little girl who ate a mountain full of mushrooms, and 1 bite at a time. Phut! Yarbemia burst out laughing. This was the first time she had seen a crow who could sing, and it sounded pretty good. "Charcoal, I think you should stop singing. Your singing is really terrible. It's much worse than my little guy's." Amy frowned as she listened to Charcoal finish singing. She shook her head in disappointment. She walked behind the counter, took out a music box, and turned on the music. Light music immediately sounded in the restaurant. The singing was pleasing to the ear, and compared to Charcoal's howling, it was like heaven and earth. That's right. Amy's little fairy sings the best. She doesn't need this stupid bird as a playmate. She only needs a beautiful golden peacock that can dance with her, Crassus said with a smile as he stroked his beard. Charcoal stared at the little fairy in the music box and fell into deep silence. When the song ended, he turned his head stiffly to look at Julian, and said helplessly, "I can't sing this song even if you kill me." Julian also fell into silence. He put Charcoal on the ground and looked at Amy with a smile that was uglier than crying. He said patiently, "Little Amy, if you learn magic from me, you only need to walk a few steps to my destination every day. You can go to the restaurant to play when you miss your father. I'll pay for your 3 meals a day, no matter what you want to eat or where you eat." "You'll pay?" Amy's eyes lit up, and she asked tentatively, "If I eat at home, will Turtle Grandpa pay?" "At home?" Urian faltered momentarily before a peculiar expression appeared on his face. He had forgotten that this little girl's family owned a restaurant. It was just that it was a little strange for her to ask him to pay for her meals at home. However, how much could a little girl eat in a day? He could definitely afford this, so he nodded and said, "That's right. As long as Boss Mag writes down the bill, I'll pay for your meals every month." "Wow, Turtle Grandpa, you're so generous." Amy's eyes lit up. She had to eat 3 bowls of Youngju fried rice, 3 rujiamos, and 6 bowls of tofu pudding a day. That was a lot of money. She was worried that her father wouldn't be able to afford it, but now it was no longer a problem. Shameless. Crassus stared at Julian. He didn't expect this guy to use the trick of tempting food. It was an effective trick he had used last time. He didn't expect him to use it in advance. "Hit me if you don't like it." Julian smiled sinisterly. It seemed that Amy liked food very much. This way, the balance of Crassus' temptation was pulled back a lot. "Julian, don't forget that 20 years ago, I beat the crap out of you," Crassus shouted angrily. His white magician's robe fluttered in the absence of wind, and the blue gem on his staff was dancing with fire. He had come here full of confidence to impress Meg and Amy with his sincerity. Then, he would be able to accept them as his disciple. But he didn't expect Julian to come out of nowhere and try to steal his disciple. Nonsense. If it weren't for your shameless sneak attack, how could a 10th tier magic caster be a match for me? After that, I would freeze you into a popsicle. If it weren't for Arena, you would still be soaking in the well south of Rodu. Julian's face darkened upon hearing this. Frost appeared under his feet, and flowers of frost bloomed on the floor, spreading in all directions. The situation suddenly became tense. The confrontation between ice and fire was formed once again. Chapter 122. Tofu Pudding. Crassus and Julian both looked confused. They looked at Amy, who had a serious expression on her face, and hesitated for a moment. After all, they were in Meg's restaurant, and if they accidentally destroyed the restaurant, they wouldn't be able to take Amy as their disciple. The two of them looked at each other. Although the old grudge was irreconcilable, the most important thing now was to make Remi happy and choose him as her master. Things like fighting could be settled privately at a time and place. The two of them had lived for more than 200 years, so they still had the patience and state of mind. "Mr. Mac, is this tofu pudding a new dish from the restaurant?" Crassus looked at Meg with a smile. This was the first time he had heard of this dish. Right now, the conditions that both parties proposed were at odds with each other. In such a situation where both parties were evenly matched, the choice was completely in Mag's hands. Hence, the most direct and simple method was to curry favor with Mag as much as possible. "Boss Mag, your restaurant's business is so good, so your dishes must be very delicious. Give me a portion first." Urian reacted quickly, and he turned to Mag. Meg naturally knew what the two of them were thinking. He still had a few servings of tofu pudding left, but he didn't plan to sell it today. However, now that Amy had mentioned it, he was also a little curious about whether Crassus and Julian would like tofu pudding, so he hesitated for a moment before looking at the two of them and saying, "Tofu pudding is a new dish from the restaurant, but it hasn't been officially sold yet. Since the two of you want to try it, then treat it as a trial. Tofu pudding comes in 2 flavors, savory and sweet. Which flavor would you like?" Host: "The system suggests that you don't let customers try it for free. The system doesn't provide free ingredients. The cost of a bowl of tofu pudding is as follows." The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "Alright, let's just talk about the cost of the ingredients. In the future, one of them might be Amy's magic teacher, so what's wrong with treating them to a bowl of tofu pudding? Besides, how can one bowl of tofu pudding be enough? I'll earn the money back by the time they have their second bowl," Mag said with a hint of mockery. "System, you're too narrow-minded and narrow-minded. You're not going to be able to do anything." The system fell into silence. After a while, a line of words appeared: 1 set of sweet and savory tofu pudding ingredients, 40 copper coins. If the production cost is 40 copper coins, then it should sell for 200 copper coins per bowl. Meg thought to himself. After all, this tofu pudding had a certain beautifying effect, and it was destined to drive women crazy. If the price was set too low, it wouldn't be worth it. "I want something sweet. I want salty." Crassus and Julian spoke almost at the same time. They looked at each other and sat down at 2 adjacent tables. They chose something different. Amy's eyes lit up. Father's tofu pudding was so delicious. No matter if it was sweet or savory, they would definitely like it. "The sweet one is the best. This old magic caster has a better taste," Yarbemia thought to herself as she looked at Crassus with admiration. "Okay, please wait a moment." Meg nodded. When he turned around, his expression became a little strange. He didn't expect that the two would choose something different without even thinking about it. The two of them sat quietly. They weren't in a hurry to get close to Amy. Their conditions were similar, and their abilities were similar. It was a little similar to the situation in the past, so before they were confident, they couldn't act too anxious. "What kind of food will this tofu pudding be?" Mr. Mac's Youngju fried rice is delicious, and many people like Rugiamo. Since little Amy recommended it, it must be delicious. It would be even better if it was sweet. Crassus looked at the kitchen expectantly. Recently, he had been coming to the restaurant every day not only because he wanted to take Amy as his disciple, but also because he had completely fallen in love with the taste of Youngju fried rice. This was also an important reason why he had decided to stay in Chaos City for the rest of his life. He wouldn't be able to taste such delicious food when he returned to Rodu. Meanwhile, Urian was looking around the restaurant. The restaurant had been open for a few days, but this was the first time that he had visited it. The decor was indeed quite nice. Even though it couldn't be described as extravagant, it was very much to his liking. There weren't any fancy decorations. Looking at the menu on the table, Julian remembered that Amy had said she wanted to eat in his restaurant. He put down the birdcage in his hand, picked up the menu, and flipped it open. He was stunned when he saw the menu. There were only 2 dishes on such a big menu. When he saw the prices, his expression became a little strange. A plate of Youngju fried rice cost 600 copper coins, a plate of Laji Rugiamo cost 300 copper coins, and a bottle of intermediate recovery potion only cost 10 gold coins. That was not even enough for 2 plates of Youngju fried rice, which he had no idea what it was. Could it be that they're working together to cheat me? Urian took a glance at Amy. Normally, there would be a long line outside the restaurant, so he had thought that the restaurant would be able to attract so many customers in such a short period of time because of its cheap and delicious food. However, there was no way that a restaurant with only 2 dishes could attract so many customers at such exorbitant prices. Forget it. If I can get a good disciple, a few thousand copper coins a day is nothing. At most, I can make a few more bottles of high-grade potions. Urian quickly withdrew his gaze and turned toward the kitchen. The faint aroma of beans wafted through the air, intermingled with a unique aroma of meat. It was different from all the meat that he had tasted in the past, and he couldn't help but look forward to what it was. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked at the birdcage that Julian put on the ground, and immediately became excited. It called out to Black Coal in the cage, and licked Amy's hand. It seemed to be in a hurry to get down. Ugly Duckling, do you want to play with Black Coal? Amy asked softly. Ugly Duckling immediately nodded and scratched its little paws excitedly. Don't come down if you dare. Black Coal looked at Ugly Duckling nervously. Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling became even more excited. Amy squatted down and put Ugly Duckling on the ground, and said seriously with a serious expression, "All right, you two have to get along well. Adorable Princess Amy, can I stay in your arms for a while?" Black Coal looked at Ugly Duckling, who was walking over lightly with a mouth full of sharp little teeth, and immediately cowered. He looked at Amy with a pleading expression. "No, you don't have a single hair on your body. I don't want to hug you." Amy shook her head decisively. Chapter 123. The tofu pudding was still steaming hot, and there were 2 small white ceramic bowls with a white spoon beside them. "This is..." Crassus's eyes lit up as he looked at the small bowls in front of him. The faint aroma of tofu pudding wafted into his nose. It was the aroma of crushed soybeans. What surprised him even more was the thing in the bowl. It was square and white, and there was a layer of reddish-golden syrup on top. It looked like a pure white jade wrapped in amber, but it shook a little when it was put down, so it looked very elastic. The aroma of the hot syrup mixed with the aroma of the soybeans made him feel the sweetness in his mouth even before he tasted it. For someone who loved desserts, it was simply too tempting. "H, it's so sweet. Aren't you afraid of being sick of it?" Julian pursed his lips, and his eyes also lit up as he looked at the tofu pudding in front of him. The same square and white tofu pudding was placed in a small bowl, and there were chopped pickled vegetables and other side dishes on top. A spoonful of reddish-orange sauce was poured over the tofu pudding, and the aroma of the sauce and side dishes mixed with the aroma of the soybeans wafted into his nose. It was simply too tempting. It's salty, but it looks very appetizing. It should be delicious, Julian thought to himself, and he was also looking forward to it. The 2 of them picked up their spoons at almost the same time and put a spoonful into their mouths. Meg, Amy, and Yarbemia all stood quietly off to the side, looking at the 2 of them with curiosity. They wanted to know which flavor of tofu pudding tasted better to them. This taste. Crassus' eyes widened. The tofu pudding wrapped in a layer of syrup melted in his mouth. The soft and fragrant tofu pudding paired with the sweet syrup was different from the usual sticky syrup. This reddish-golden syrup was sweet but not greasy, and it didn't cover up the natural aroma of the tofu pudding either. He swallowed it down his throat, and there was still a faint aroma of soybeans lingering in his mouth. There was a hint of sweetness, and there was a rich aftertaste. This is made from soybeans, right? But how can soybeans be made to be so soft and tender? I don't even need to chew, it melts in my mouth. And this syrup is very special. Even though it's sweet, it doesn't feel greasy at all. After swallowing it, I actually feel quite refreshed. Crassus looked at Meg with countless questions in his mind. He couldn't stop eating, and he just couldn't get tired of it. It's delicious. How could there be such delicious food in this world? Urian stared at the empty spoon in front of him, completely rooted to the spot. The white and tender tofu pudding was wrapped in reddish-orange syrup, and there was a bit of chopped pickled mustard on top. When he put it into his mouth, it melted without chewing. The sweet tofu pudding, the savory pickled mustard, and the syrup blended together perfectly, stimulating his taste buds. It was as if every grain was jumping for joy. After swallowing it, there was a faint bin aroma in his mouth, and he felt refreshed. Crassus had eaten Yangju fried rice many times in the past, and he was looking forward to the tofu pudding. However, today was Julian's first time in the restaurant, and it was his first time tasting Meg's food. The impact was so great that he couldn't help but put another spoonful into his mouth, and a joyful smile appeared on his wrinkled face. It seems that everyone is quite satisfied. A smile also appeared on Mag's face. The smiles on Crassus and Urian's faces weren't fake at all. Seeing that his food was being recognized and brought joy to his customers, his mood also improved. Ding, dang. Crassus and Julian finished their bowls of tofu pudding at almost the same time. They looked at the empty bowls in front of them, and their expressions were as if they hadn't had enough. "Boss, another bowl of savory tofu pudding. It's so delicious." Julian put down the spoon in his hand and looked at Meg with a slightly excited expression. "Sweet tofu pudding is the best." Crassus glanced at Julian and then looked at Meg. "Mr. Mac, can I have another bowl of sweet tofu pudding as well? I'll pay for it. Just name a price." "What's so good about sweet tofu pudding? You're not a child. You're over 100 years old, and you still like sweet tofu pudding." Julian looked at Crassus with undisguised disdain. "What's so good about savory tofu pudding? Savory tofu pudding goes best with sweet tofu pudding. A heretic like you should be roasted over a fire. You can't even understand the feeling of sweet tofu pudding sliding down your throat." Crassus held his magic caster's staff and glared at Julian. Specks of red light condensed on his magic caster's staff, and it looked like he was really angry. "Bullshit. Your sweet tofu pudding is the heretic. Savory tofu pudding is the true flavor. You can't even imagine how delicious tofu pudding with sauce and chopped up with all kinds of side dishes will be." Julian's voice also rose a few octaves. Frost appeared under his feet again, and the temperature around him dropped a few notches. "I'm sorry, tofu pudding isn't officially on sale today, and I didn't plan to try it, so I don't have a second bowl." Meg had a strange expression on his face as he looked at the two people who were about to fight to the death over a bowl of tofu pudding. This was probably the first battle between sweet and savory in this alternate world. He didn't expect that the two of them, who had come for Amy, would divert their attention over a bowl of tofu pudding. In his previous life, the battle between sweet and savory basically existed on all kinds of forums and Weibo, and the keyboard was the only weapon. No matter how fierce the argument was, it wasn't to the point of actually fighting. However, the situation was different now. Crassus and Julian were arguing, and it looked like they were about to fight to prove their favorite tofu pudding's name. "Sweet tofu pudding is delicious," Yarbemia murmured softly, and only she could hear her own voice. "It's so delicious, so why are they fighting over it?" Amy looked at the two of them with a conflicted expression on her little face. She was a little puzzled. "Nothing else?" Crassus and Julian were a little disappointed when they heard that. The two of them looked at each other at the same time, and they both looked a little angry. The anger that had been building up over fighting for a disciple finally exploded after a bowl of tofu pudding fermented it. "Julian, you heretic, I've been annoyed with you for a long time. Let's fight fair and square. See if I don't break your skull." Crassus stood up with the help of his magic caster's staff, and glared at Julian. "Me? Crassus, do you think I'm afraid of you? I'm going to freeze you and throw you into the moat to feed the fishes." Julian also stood up with a hoarse voice, and his expression was a little gloomy. "So, you two are going to fight over which one is better?" Amy asked curiously as she looked at the two of them. After a pause, she clapped her little hands and said, "Then hurry up and start. It's fine as long as you don't fight in the restaurant. Originally, I said I would update 10 chapters, but I cultivated too late last night, and I've been sleepy since I started writing tonight. After writing this chapter, I feel like I'm going to heaven. I have to go to bed. Sorry, I'll owe you 10 chapters first. I'll pay you back in 2 days. Sorry. 9 chapters was my limit. I left on the 23rd recently. I've been in Chengdu, and most of the time, I've been staying in the hotel to write. I'll go home in a few days and settle down. Tomorrow morning's update will probably be late, so I'll update after waking up." Chapter 124. Crassus and Urian looked at Amy, who was clapping her little hands with an expectant look on her face. It was as if they were seeing the little girl from 20 years ago who was clapping her little hands and egging them on to fight, cheering them on as she watched. Irina's affinity with magic was unprecedented. It was as if she had been blessed by magic, and she could learn any type of magic at once. This was why the two of them, who were both among the top magic casters on the continent, wanted to take her as their disciple. With such a disciple, their lives were not in vain. She could learn everything that they knew. Furthermore, she was an elf with a lifespan of 800 years, and the princess of the elven race. In the future, when she used a certain magic spell, Perhaps people would remember who her master was, and leave a mark of her own in this world. However, because of the Elven Queen's intervention, the two of them, who were about to compromise, were unable to take Irina as their disciple. Julian came to Chaos City, and opened a magic potion shop to live a leisurely life. He didn't care much about apprenticeship. In the beginning, he had only taken her as his lifelong rival. Crassus was very eager to take her as his disciple, so he deliberately intervened. He didn't expect that little elven girl to be so eccentric and talented. After spending some time with her, he really wanted to take her as his disciple for the first time. He was completely at odds with Crassus. At the time, Irina was with the two old men, and clearly didn't know how to choose. On one hand, she wanted to learn Crassus's magic caster's staff, and on the other hand, she wanted to learn all of Julian's ice magic. Thus, she didn't take them as her master. In the end, she learned a few spells from each of them, but before she could make a decision, she was taken away by the Elven Queen. This became a regret for both of them. They felt that the other had ruined their plans. Because of this, they fought a few times, but it was a draw. After that, they didn't see each other again. This was their first official meeting since they parted ways more than 10 years ago. The savory tofu pudding is the best. Crassus, since you don't want to admit defeat, do you dare to fight me? Let's see who's better today. Julian stared at the Crassus with a bone-chilling voice. He stole a glance at Amy out of the corner of his eye. The savory tofu pudding was so delicious, so he would definitely like to eat it. As long as he defeated the Crassus and cleared the name of the savory tofu pudding, he might be able to take her as his disciple. The sweet tofu pudding is the best. Crassus's expression also became serious as he glanced at Amy. With Amy's age, she should have a sweet tooth. Didn't all children like sweets? As long as he could defeat Julian today, he might be able to accept Amy as his disciple. It seemed that this battle was the most crucial one. He lifted his magic caster's staff and walked out of the door, saying, "If you want to fight, then let's fight. We'll settle old and new grudges together. We haven't seen each other for more than 10 years. I'm afraid you've already forgotten the taste of my magic caster's staff. Hey, look at you now. It's just a walking stick. Do you still think you're the same melee magic caster who could jump up and hit a giant dragon's knee?" Julian pursed his lips with a disdainful expression. He also walked toward the door with a magic staff in his hand. "Hey, Master Julian, please take me with you." Charcoal's fearful voice sounded from behind him. Ugly Duckling was clawing at the birdcage, trying to grab Charcoal with its little paws. However, its paws were simply too small, so it couldn't touch Charcoal at all. Meanwhile, Charcoal was already standing on the other side of the cage. This little guy didn't look very big, but its sharp fangs and claws made Ugly Duckling feel threatened. However, Julian clearly had no intention of paying any attention to him. He and Crassus went straight out the door. "Father, can we go and watch?" Amy looked up at Meg with an expectant expression on her little face. She had never seen magic casters fight before. "Of course you can. MIA, come and watch as well." Meg nodded with a smile. He held onto Amy's little hand and led her toward the door. There was still close to half an hour before opening time, and he was also very curious to see what a battle between 10th-tier magic casters would be like. Even Meg Alex didn't have any memories of such a battle. Oh. Yarbemia also followed along with an expectant expression. The two magic casters were about to fight over whether to eat sweet tofu pudding or salty tofu pudding. As a fan of sweet tofu pudding, she naturally wanted to see Crassus emerge victorious. Ding! The bell rang, and the customers who were lining up at the entrance faltered slightly. They clearly didn't expect the restaurant to open so early. However, when the door opened, it wasn't Meg who came out. Instead, it was Crassus. His expression was a little serious, and the customers lining up at the entrance consciously moved aside to make way for him. Although Crassus often had some interesting interactions with Amy in the restaurant, and also lined up at the entrance early like a normal customer, his status and power as a magic caster of the Roth Empire's royal family still commanded respect. Why did Master Crassus come out of the restaurant so early today? Judging from his expression, he most likely was rejected by Mr. Mac again. Mr. Mac is really a strange man. Exactly. If any magic caster wants my kid, I'll give him 500 gold coins a year. Everyone was discussing softly. They were very envious of Meg. Not only was he good at cooking, but even his cute little daughter was begging a magic caster to take her as his disciple. He was a winner in life. Crassus hadn't gone far when the door rang again. Everyone looked over in surprise. A hunchbacked old man in a black magician's robe slowly walked out of the door. He looked at everyone with a cold gaze. Everyone shifted their gazes. In that instant, everyone felt as if they had fallen into an ice cave. This magician was too frightening. Everyone couldn't help but think of a word, dark magician. Wandering between light and darkness, righteous and evil, dark magicians were existences that were feared by many. If you took a step forward, you would lose your prefix. If you took a step back, you would fall into the abyss and become an evil magic caster. This was what a dark magic caster was. Crassus stood still at the Aiden Square 100 meters away. He turned around and looked at Julian. The blue gem on the top of his magic caster's staff lit up like a torch. Julian walked past the crowd unhurriedly. When he was about 5 meters away from the restaurant, he took a step forward. Countless white frost flowers appeared on the ground under his feet, extending toward Crassus like countless vines. Chapter 125. What a terrifying ice magic spell. At the entrance of the restaurant, someone exclaimed softly. He stared at the square where heavy snow had suddenly fallen. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. That black-robed mage dared to attack Lord Crassus. Lord Crassus is an 8th-tier mage. Is this black-robed mage as powerful as him? But the two of them didn't look too good when they came out of the restaurant. Did they come out of the restaurant to fight? What happened in the restaurant before? Everyone subconsciously took a few steps back in the direction of the restaurant as they whispered in bewilderment. For a moment, they couldn't figure out what had happened to make the two powerful magic casters so angry in the morning, to the point of casting such a terrifying spell. Ding! The bell at the entrance of the restaurant rang again. Meg opened the door, and Amy, who was holding his hand, jumped out first. She looked at the snowy area in front of Julian in the square, and her big blue eyes were full of excitement. She jumped up happily and shook Meg's hand. "Father, look, it's snowing. It's snowing. Yes, it's snowing, and there's a dragon." Meg nodded, but his attention was more attracted by the frost dragon that was gradually taking shape in the air. It was a silver-white western dragon with a wingspan of more than 20 meters. White scales covered its whole body, and it flapped its wings slowly in the blood mist. The wind and snow would automatically separate when it was about to fall on its body. A pair of big blue eyes opened, and stared at Crassus, who was standing 100 meters away. In Meg Alex's memory, there were many memories of slaying dragons. It wasn't rare to see a sharp heavy sword cut off a dragon's huge head, and the scene of red blood spraying in the air accompanied by the dragon's desperate roar was not uncommon. Hence, he didn't feel afraid when he looked at the dragon. Instead, he felt a little itchy. The hot blood hidden in the depths of his body seemed to suddenly throb after seeing the giant dragon. This hand can only hold a kitchen knife now. I don't know when I'll be able to hold a heavy sword. Meg clenched his fist. Although he wasn't a battle maniac, when he felt that life was boring in his previous life, he had experienced many exciting sports, such as low-altitude parachuting, doing handstands on the Norwegian Giant's Tongue, and swinging at 80 kilometers per hour in the Grand Canyon of the United States. If he could go up to the sky and slay a dragon, it would indeed be a good pastime to pass the time. Look, it's a dragon. A frost dragon that's more than 20 meters long. Someone soon noticed the frost dragon in the snow, and exclaimed with some fear on their faces. Even an 8th-tier magus wouldn't be able to summon such a solid frost dragon. This black-robed magus is at least a 9th-tier magus, or even a 10th-tier magus. A little old man at the side exclaimed in shock. It seemed that he had some understanding of Magi. So that's a dragon. Yarbemia stood behind Mag, and her mouth was also slightly agape at the sight of the frost dragon in the sky. This was the first time she had seen a real giant dragon. Giant dragons would occasionally descend upon Chaos City, but she had spent most of her time in the kitchen of a restaurant, so she had never seen one before. She had only heard about her father from her mother when she was a child. However, that was only a few words that her mother had said to her on a cold night. That was a very imposing man. He wore a suit of golden armor and could transform into a 100-meter-long dragon. He could take her to the heavens and the earth, to wherever she wanted to go. But after saying that, her mother cried the whole night. From then on, she never asked about anything related to the giant dragon again. There's a big flying lizard in the snow. But why can lizards fly? Amy also saw the dragon in the snow, and looked at Meg with confusion. That's a giant dragon, a frost dragon. Meg replied with a smile. Amy had never seen a giant dragon before, but this dragon did look a little like a big lizard with wings. A giant dragon? Amy's eyes lit up. She stood on her short legs and wanted to take a closer look, but there were many customers standing at the restaurant's entrance, blocking her view. She had to turn around and spread her little arms. She pouted and said softly to Meg, "Father, I want a hug. I want to see a giant dragon." Meg looked at Amy, who pouted and raised her little arms, and felt his heart melt. Forget it. With such a cute daughter, why do I need to go to the sky and slay a giant dragon? Okay, Father will carry you. Meg bent down and picked Amy up with a smile. During this period of time, eating Yeongju fried rice and rujiamo had improved his physical fitness. Although it was still some distance away from that of a normal person, it was better than a useless person with one. 5, however, it was still difficult for him to lift her up. The little girl was soft and had a faint fragrance on her body. It was the smell of cherry blossom shower gel. Father is so nice. Amy hugged Meg's neck with her little arms and leaned over to kiss him on the cheek. Her little face was full of joy. She turned to look at the frost dragon in the sky, and then looked at Crassus standing in the distance. She said worriedly, "If this giant dragon is on Turtle Grandpa's side, will Half-Beard Grandpa be able to defeat it? Father, should we ask them to stop?" "Don't worry. They should be about the same strength." Meg shook his head with a smile. Crassus was the most powerful melee magic caster on the continent, who had killed a giant dragon with his magician's staff. It shouldn't be a problem for him to deal with a frost dragon summoned by magic. After all, they were old rivals. If he couldn't even take the first blow, he didn't deserve to be his opponent at all. However, Amy, who had just instigated Crassus and Julian to fight, was now worried about their safety. Although the little girl liked to be noisy, she was still kind at heart. This made him very happy. "Mr. Mac, what's going on? Why are Lord Crassus and that magic caster fighting?" Prohl asked curiously, turning to Meg when he heard the noise. Hearing that, the customers all turned to look at Meg. Such a big scene was rare in Chaos City. Even the people of the Grey Temple could only maintain order on the sidelines. But they only became like this after they came out of the restaurant. What happened in the restaurant? They were fighting over whether the sweet or salty tofu pudding was better, Amy explained to the crowd. Tofu pudding? The crowd was even more confused. The restaurant didn't sell this dish, right? And if it was a sweet or salty dish, why would they fight over it? Moreover, they were two powerful magic casters. A giant dragon. In the blacksmith shop next door, a square Morbai pushed open the door and came out. A gust of cold wind blew in his face, making him shiver. He looked up and saw the frost dragon in mid-air. "I'm currently in 6th place, only a few votes away from 5th place. I'll go out for a rujiamo tonight, then come back and continue writing. I still have 2 more chapters. I still owe more chapters from tonight. So far, I owe a total of 51 chapters from tips, monthly votes, and average subscriptions. Plus yesterday's 1 chapter, I owe a total of 52 chapters." Chapter 126. Morbai clenched his fists tightly as he looked up at the dragon. His eyes were burning with rage, but he quickly recognized that it was not a real dragon. He looked down and saw Julian, and couldn't help but be surprised. He had been running a blacksmith shop here for decades, and naturally knew that Julian had moved here more than 10 years ago. Moreover, he had bought a lot of middle-grade recovery potions from Julian. After so many years, although they didn't interact much, they still knew each other. Before this, he thought that Julian was at most a 5th-tier magic caster because the effects of his middle-grade recovery potions were ordinary, and the price was cheaper than other places. But now, it seemed that he had completely underestimated Julian's strength. To be able to summon a frost dragon of this level, Julian had to be at least a 9th-tier magic caster. He had no chance of winning against this frost dragon. Seems like I have to hurry up and develop the Thunderbolt bomb. Otherwise, I can't even defeat a magic dragon, let alone that damned red dragon. Morbai clenched his fists tightly as he looked in the direction of the restaurant. He glanced at Meg, who was carrying Amy. He didn't know why Julian and Crassus were so angry early in the morning that they were fighting in front of the restaurant. Not far away, Sargeras, who was leading 2 demons with black lava patterns towards the restaurant, suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked in the direction of the restaurant in shock. "Boss, what's wrong?" the tall and thin demon on the left asked Sargeras. Sargeras continued to stare ahead and asked, "I've told you to be obedient when we reach the restaurant. Do you still remember?" "Boss, didn't you say that it was a restaurant opened by a human?" "So what? Humans have to make a detour when they see us. Once we enter a human's restaurant, we can't do whatever we want and do whatever we want." The short and fat demon next to him laughed foolishly, and didn't seem to take Sargeras's words to heart at all. "For you idiot." Sargeras knocked the demon's head with a chestnut, and laughed in exasperation. "Look at that for yourself." "What is that?" "The boss's daughter can burn you to ashes with a fireball spell." "Ouch ouch ouch." The demon covered his head and jumped 2 steps to the side. He looked in the direction Sargeras was pointing, and his eyes widened. He quickly hid behind Sargeras, and said with a little fear, "Boss, isn't that the legendary giant dragon? Why is there a dragon here?" "That's right, boss. Is there a giant dragon behind this restaurant?" The tall and thin troll asked curiously as he inched closer to Sargeras. "This is obviously not a real dragon, but even if there isn't a dragon behind this restaurant, there is still a great magician who is even more terrifying than a dragon. So, all of you better behave yourselves, or else I won't be able to save you." Sargeras warned seriously as he looked at Crassus, who was standing with a magic caster's staff in the distance. Sargeras had been in awe of Crassus ever since he saw Crassus beat a giant dragon with his magic caster's staff outside Los Angeles. He had never seen Meg Alex before, and had only heard about the rumors of Crassus slaying dragons. However, he had seen the power of Crassus with his own eyes. "Is that the white-bearded magic caster?" The 2 demons also looked at Crassus, and then at the giant dragon in the air. "I think that old man will be eaten by that giant dragon, right?" "Not necessarily," Sargeras said non-committally with a smirk. "Look, it's snowing over there. And there's a white giant dragon in there." "Really? Could it be that a giant dragon wants to cause trouble in Chaos City? Isn't that the restaurant that's doing very well recently? It's that restaurant with only 2 dishes on the menu, and the cheapest one costs 300 copper coins. I don't know why those idiots are so eager to give money to the owner every day, and even line up early in the morning." "Exactly. It would be great if that giant dragon smashed that restaurant. My restaurant's business has been a lot worse recently, and many of my regulars haven't been coming recently. I saw them lining up in front of that restaurant yesterday. Quick, let's go watch the show. It's a giant dragon. This is the first time I've seen a real giant dragon." Many people in the Aiden Square also noticed the commotion in the corner, and began to talk about it. Many restaurant owners were jealous, and passers-by approached the restaurant curiously. Even in Chaos City, giant dragons were not commonly seen. After all, many giant dragons would transform into human forms after entering Chaos City. "There's a situation over there. It's a battle between 2 magic casters above the 8th tier. It's a 5th tier incident. Report it to the temple immediately. You 2, come with me. Evacuate the crowd and try to minimize the casualties." At the same time, on the other side of the Aiden Square, a middle-aged man in a grey robe looked in the direction of Amy's, and his expression changed. He turned to a young man in a similar grey robe beside him, and rushed toward the restaurant. "Yes," the young man replied. He turned and ran a few steps, and saw a young man in a fancy robe approaching on a horse. He pulled the young man off his horse, and threw a wooden badge into the young man's arms. He flipped onto the horse's back and said, "The Grey Temple is handling a case, and we're temporarily requisitioning your horse. Come to the Grey Temple with this badge later." Since when did the Grey Temple take horses for cases? The young man looked at the wooden badge in his hand with a blank expression. He had wanted to show off his new horse, but now he could only curse his bad luck and return to the Grey Temple. The restaurant's new product hasn't been officially released yet. These two happened to have business here, so I let them try it. I didn't expect them to fight over the taste of the new product. At the entrance of the restaurant, Meg looked at the curious customers and explained with a smile. At a time like this, he naturally had to advertise the tofu pudding. They're fighting over the taste of a new product. Everyone's expression became a little strange. It seems that these two flavors must be very unique and delicious. Prole thought for a moment, and then looked at Meg expectantly, and asked, "Mr. Mack, will the new product be released today?" Chapter 127. Meg shook his head with a smile and said, "Sorry, we don't have any new products for sale this morning, and the tasting is already over. We'll officially start selling tofu pudding tonight." "I see, then we'll have to come back tonight." Prole was a little disappointed, but he knew that Meg was a man of his word, so there was no point in trying to persuade him otherwise. All of the other customers also made a mental note of this, and they all prepared to line up early tonight to try this mysterious new product. "Look, father, the giant dragon is moving." Just as everyone was chatting, REMI suddenly exclaimed excitedly. Julian took 5 steps forward, and the drifting snowflakes had already become a blizzard. The howling winds wreaked havoc within a radius of 100 meters, and a thick layer of snow had already accumulated on the ground. Crassus, who was standing 1,000 feet away, was surrounded by a vast expanse of dryness. All of the wind and snow would automatically part in front of him, as if there were an invisible barrier around him that completely shielded him from the outside world. The staff in his hand was as tall as a man, and a flame seemed to rise from it. The fiery red light looked a little hot, like the warm light in the snowstorm. The frost dragon had already completely materialized, and it flapped its wings, and the blizzard became even more violent. 3 small whirlwinds appeared under its wings, and they quickly grew in size. "Julian, it's been more than 10 years, but it looks like you still haven't made any progress." Crassus looked at the frost dragon in the sky, and was in no hurry to attack. "You're getting older and older," Julian retorted. He waved his wand, and yelled, "Savory tofu pudding is the best. Die, you heretic who eats sweet tofu pudding." The frost dragon in the sky let loose a loud roar, and opened its massive mouth to spit out 3 sharp icicles. 1 turned into 3, 3 turned into 9, and in the blink of an eye, there were 27 half-meter-long icicles, all of which were hurtling toward Crassus like tens of thousands of arrows. "You savory tofu pudding guy, today, I'll show you what's orthodox." Crassus's expression also turned serious. He raised the staff in his hand, and a huge fireball with a diameter of 1 meter appeared. It went straight for the incoming icicles, and exploded in mid-air the moment the two collided. 27 icicles were shattered almost at the same time. Half of them were vaporized, and the rest fell to the ground with a clatter. After listening to their conversation, all the customers finally believed Meg's words. The two of them were really fighting over the taste of tofu pudding. "Wow, Half-Beard Grandpa really knows Fireball, and it looks so powerful. It can even explode." Amy's eyes widened with excitement. "Little M.I., do you want to learn?" Meg looked at Amy and asked with a smile. Now that the choice was in his hands, he could totally choose what Amy liked. "Yes, I do." Amy nodded with anticipation in her eyes. However, her gaze then fell upon the giant dragon in the sky, and she was a little conflicted as she said, "But Turtle Grandpa's giant dragon is also very powerful. If Amy can also conjure a giant dragon, will I be able to sit on it and fly?" "Then do you want to learn that?" Meg asked, trying not to laugh. In terms of the wonders of magic, Julian's ice magic was indeed more interesting than Crassus' simple and crude fireball. Whether it was fun or entertaining, it was definitely more popular among children. "Yes," Amy said with a nod after thinking seriously for a while. "In that case." Meg fell into deep thought as he looked at the two of them. He didn't think that Amy would want to learn both of them. This was going to be a problem. Meanwhile, Crassus didn't wait for the Frost and Frost Dragon to attack again. Instead, he turned toward Julian with a cold smile, and said, "Even a real giant dragon couldn't stop me, so how can a fake like you be able to stop me? Let's settle our scores today." As soon as his voice trailed off, a series of peculiar silver runes appeared on his legs, and his body swayed as he charged toward Urian. Julian didn't panic in the slightest. He waved his wand forward, and a series of thick walls of ice appeared in front of Crassus in an attempt to stop him. Bam! A crisp sound rang out, and the first wall of ice shattered under the magic caster's staff. Following that, a series of shattering sounds could be heard. Crassus almost turned into a blur as he charged toward Julian. All the walls of ice in front of him were shattered under the magic caster's staff. From the beginning to the end, the magic caster's staff didn't emit any magic waves. It was held in Crassus' hand as if he was holding a poker. He smashed it all the way, giving people the impression that he was a powerful knight instead of a magic caster. In that case, who's going to win in the end? Someone asked curiously. "I think the black-robed magic caster will win. That's a Frost and Frost Dragon. If he can summon such a terrifying existence, his power must be terrifying. I think Lord Crassus will win. He's a royal worshipper of the Roth Empire. His power shouldn't be underestimated." The moment this question was raised, the guests standing at the door began to argue. "Lord Crassus, you must win. Clear the name of the sweet party." Yarbemia clenched her little fists as she prayed in her heart. Although that Frost and Frost Dragon seemed to be very close to each other, she had no intention of compromising when it came to the taste of tofu pudding. This should be the so-called melee magic caster, right? Meg raised an eyebrow. No matter how glorious the battle records were in the information, it wasn't as shocking as seeing this scene in person. A magic caster with such terrifying speed and power could be said to be a knight who was held back by magic. Wow, Grandpa Halfbeard is so awesome. Father, I want to learn this. Amy exclaimed with her mouth wide open. Julian tilted his head slightly, and heard Amy's words. His expression turned cold, and he pointed his wand at Crassus. The Frost and Frost Dragon in mid-air flapped its wings, and flew straight down. Its sinister dragon head opened its mouth, and bit down at Crassus. "That bite is going to kill someone," someone exclaimed softly. Some timid people had already closed their eyes, and didn't dare to continue watching. Chapter 128. The fact that a great magician was able to break through the ice with his staff had already shocked everyone. Now, he was even able to jump 3 meters in a single leap. It looked like he was going to smash the dragon's head with his staff. This move completely overturned everyone's impression of mags being weak in close combat and relying only on their mouths. This old man was simply an unprecedented close combat mage. Against the terrifying Frost WM, he had only cast the most basic fireball spell from beginning to end, and relied on the magic caster's staff for the rest. Gandalf. Meg raised his eyebrows. Julian's ice magic was superb, while Crassus's magic and melee combat abilities were perfectly integrated. All kinds of magic runes appeared on his body to support him in completing various difficult moves, and at the same time, provide him with great strength. Both of them had their own strengths in magic. If Amy could learn ice magic from Julian and melee magic from Crassus, she might be able to grow into a magician who could attack from afar and improve. Such a magician had almost no weaknesses, and it was probably unprecedented. I just don't know if they will agree. After all, they seem to want to fight to the death when they see each other. Meg looked at the two of them a little worriedly. Now that he had everything planned out, the next step was to see how he could make the two of them agree to accept Amy as their disciple. Amazing, amazing. Father, I want to learn all of them. Amy clapped her little hands and exclaimed excitedly, "It's so fun to smash the ice with a staff. It's so fun to transform into a dragon. It can even snow. Then, we can build a big snowman in front of the restaurant every day. Okay, then let's make your request later. Maybe they will agree." Meg looked at Amy in his arms, and his eyes lit up. If he were to say this, it would seem a little greedy, but if Amy were to say it, then there would be no problem. Okay. Amy nodded obediently. After thinking for a while, she said, but don't they all want to accept Amy as their disciple? You should be more anxious than them, right? Yes, that's probably the case. Meg was taken aback for a moment. That was indeed the case, but he did not expect Amy to be able to see the situation so clearly. She was even a little scheming. Everyone held their breaths as they stared at the Crassus that had leaped high into the air. The magic staff that was as tall as a human was flashing with a red light, and mysterious golden-red runes appeared on it, enveloping the entire staff as if it had been ignited. On the other side, a frost WM with a wingspan of more than 20 meters swooped down with a snowstorm. The strong winds it brought along created a huge crater in the snow on the ground. The 3 tornadoes formed earlier flew towards the Crassus in a triangular formation. 2 small trees were swept up and cut into pieces by the tornadoes. Even a rock was cut into pieces. The howling snowstorm drifted out, bringing with it the coldness of winter. When it landed on the faces of the onlookers, it was a little painful. The onlookers were a little frightened and took a few steps back. Watching a fight of this level would be life-threatening. White light flashed in the dragon's open mouth, and a silvery white ball of light condensed as if it were preparing for some kind of powerful attack. Can the Crassus defeat this dragon? Everyone was speculating in their hearts. Compared to the massive dragon, the Crassus was like an ant trying to compete with an elephant. There was no comparison in terms of size. The Grey Temple is handling this case. Those who are not involved in this matter, step back. Right at this moment, a loud voice sounded from behind everyone, and everyone hurriedly opened up a path. Beza came forward with 2 members of the Grey Temple. His chest was heaving up and down violently from running all the way. He looked at the terrifying dragon and the Crassus, who had leaped high into the air and was about to smash the dragon's head with his staff, and his expression darkened. As the captain of the patrol team of the Grey Temple and a 5th-tier knight, he was naturally not weak. He was able to handle most of the things that happened in the Aiden Square every day. However, looking at the frost dragon and the white-haired old man leaping high into the air with his staff, he was getting a headache. Unfortunately for him, this was the situation that he was unable to resolve. This was a duel between 2 magicians above the 9th level. Let alone him, even if it was a knight of the 8th level, he would only be able to say a few words. He didn't even have the qualifications to do so. He turned his head to the 2 men beside him and said, "Evacuate the crowd and minimize the casualties. Wait for backup." Yes. The 2 subordinates also wore grave expressions. They had been patrolling the Aiden Square for a while, and they had seen many small fights every day. However, a duel between 2 great magic casters like this was very rare. They quickly rushed out and gestured for the onlookers to back off in case they were accidentally injured. More and more people were attracted by the commotion. A gigantic frost dragon and a snowstorm that had appeared in this area were extremely rare scenes. Under the watchful eyes of the onlookers, Crassus' staff finally landed on the frost dragon's head. The frost dragon opened its mouth and spat out a silver ball of ice. The light snowflakes floating in the air instantly froze into ice particles before falling to the ground. A terrifyingly low temperature emanated from the ball of ice, and it seemed as if something was struggling to break out of the ball of ice. "Break!" Crassus roared as his hand landed on the ball of ice first. Bam! A crisp sound rang out, and the head-sized ball of ice instantly shattered. An even smaller silver ice dragon darted out of the ball of ice, trying to go around the staff and crash into Crassus. However, the speed of the staff was simply too fast. The moment the ball of ice shattered, it had already landed on the small silver dragon and smashed it into nothingness. The chill in the air was dispelled by the flames circulating on the staff. The snowflakes in the air were also swept away, and a clear space appeared in midair. There was nothing in front of the frost dragon's head, and the staff landed on the frost dragon's head without slowing down. Bam! A muffled sound rang out. The staff, which was as tall as a man, was like a matchstick in front of the frost dragon with a wingspan of 20 meters. It looked a little ridiculous. However, when this matchstick-like object landed on the frost dragon's head, it was as if it had the force of 1,000 kilograms. The frost dragon's head that had been raised high up in the air was suddenly smashed off. A beam of fire rose from the staff, and instantly enveloped the frost dragon's head. The red flames spread along the dragon's body, and in the blink of an eye, the white frost dragon had turned into a fire dragon. With a bang, it exploded, and turned into a dense mist that filled the air. Chapter 129. I can't believe he won. The crowd was silent for a moment as they looked on at the giant dragon that Crassus had smashed into smithereens. In comparison, Crassus was so tiny, yet he was able to smash a frost dragon into smithereens. Everyone was struck by a sense of absurdity. Wow, Halfbeard Grandpa is so awesome. That's awesome. Amy's eyes also widened as she clapped her little hands together. She looked at the staff in Crassus' hand with sparkling blue eyes, and exclaimed, "That staff is so powerful. If only I could hold it." Meg was also quite surprised. The power displayed by Crassus was indeed incredible. It was hard to believe that a 120-years-old man could achieve such a feat. This wasn't just pure physical strength. Instead, it was the perfect application of magic to his body. His control over the giant dragon was truly astounding. That old man is so scary. The two lava demons behind Sargeras were completely astonished. They had thought that the giant dragon was already terrifying enough, but they didn't think that the old man would be able to smash it into smithereens with a single strike. This was the first time that they'd learned that humans, who were synonymous with weakness in their hearts, could be so powerful and terrifying. Half of that old man's beard was burned off by the restaurant owner's daughter. Sargeras had seen Crassus smashing a real giant dragon into smithereens outside of Rhodu, so he had some inkling of what was to come, and wasn't very surprised. "That little girl is so terrifying," the tall and thin demon exclaimed. He hesitated momentarily before tugging on Sargeras' sleeve, and fearfully said, "Boss, why don't we go to another restaurant? Keel and I just arrived in Chaos City today, so we can just find a random restaurant to eat at." "That's right, boss. We haven't seen each other for decades. This time, we rushed over as soon as we heard about you. Many of our brothers are still on the way. Mond and I were discussing on the way to have a good drink with you, boss. I'm afraid drinking in that restaurant won't be fun." The short and fat demon nodded in agreement. Sargeras shook his head, and didn't explain further. "There's no wine in this restaurant, and I didn't come here to welcome you. I brought you here to try the Ruggiamo. After tasting it, you'll know why I summoned you to Chaos City." Sargeras shook his head, and didn't explain much. The two demons looked at each other to make sure that Sargeras had no intention of changing his mind, so they didn't say anything else. Sargeras was the most powerful lava warrior among the lava demons. He had led the lava demons into countless battles with other demon races. But 50 years ago, he chose to leave the demon islands, saying that he wanted to find a way for the lava demons to break through and reignite the glory of the lava demons. 50 years had passed in the blink of an eye, and there had been no news of him. A few days ago, he suddenly sent a message back to the lava demons via a flamingo, saying that he had found a way to make the lava demons break through quickly. He wanted to gather his brothers in Chaos City. The lava demons hadn't been doing well in recent years. Many of them were wandering outside, so only the two of them could come here as soon as possible. Many others might be on the way. The name Sargeras represented the hope of the lava demons. Not long ago, they thought that he had died in a foreign land. Otherwise, why hadn't there been any news from him for so long? When the chief received the message, he even suspected that it was a trap set by other demon races. When the two of them came to Chaos City and found Sargeras according to the address, although they hadn't seen each other for 50 years, the feeling of meeting their leader made their blood boil again. The lava demons wouldn't be bullied by other demon races anymore. "You're a third slower than you used to be. Looks like you're really getting old," Julian said as he looked at Crassus with deep eyes. "No, I'm dying. If you still want to fight with me this time, I'll fight with my life." Crassus slowly tightened his grip on his magic caster's staff. Raging flames rose from the staff and enveloped his body. Standing in the snow, he was very eye-catching. Julian frowned. This time, he was silent for a long time. In a hoarse voice, he said, Most of the people who experienced that war back then are dead. I didn't expect that our sworn enemies would survive to the end. Everyone will die. The two of us have already lived for many more years. Crassus' expression softened a little. He looked at Julian, who was also old and hunched like he was carrying a big turtle shell. Those people back then had died one by one, and there weren't many left. Yes. You're going to die anyway, so I don't mind you dying early. Julian nodded, and a sinister smile appeared on his face. He waved the black magic staff in his hand, and sharp icicles suddenly rose from Crassus' feet. They grew rapidly, and pierced towards Crassus, who was standing in the middle like a bird's nest. Everyone's heart skipped a beat when they saw this scene. Julian's move was no different from a sneak attack. It would not be easy for Crassus to dodge it all of a sudden. You're about the same as me. Crassus also smiled. He slammed his magic caster's staff on the ground, and the flames around his body surged out, forming a wall of fire around him. All the icicles cracked and broke when they hit the wall of fire. They turned into water vapor and completely evaporated. The seemingly dangerous scene was resolved just like that. Crassus moved his feet, and rushed towards Julian, who was not far away. He smashed all the icicles that appeared along the way, and none of them could stop him at all. Bang! Crassus appeared in front of Julian almost in the blink of an eye. He smashed his magic caster's staff on Julian's head without hesitation, but there was a crisp sound, and he turned into ice shards on the ground. It was an iceman. Crassus, I'm here. Julian's voice came from behind. Countless Julians appeared in the square, and all of them looked exactly the same. They all had sinister smiles on their faces as they stared at Crassus. There are so many turtle shell grandpas. Which one is the real him? Amy looked around curiously, trying to find the real Julian among them. However, all of them looked exactly the same, and there was no way to tell them apart. Julian, you still like to hide as much as you did in the past. As a great mage, is this all you've got? Crassus frowned as he saw an exaggerated number of Julians. Crassus, you've led the mags astray. Do you know how many talented mags were cut down like vegetables by those ordinary knights when they wanted to learn how to fight at close range like you? As a noble mage, you should play with the enemy. Only those clumsy knights like to fight at close range. Julian's annoyed voice sounded. At the same time, he raised his hand and was about to attack. Chapter 130. Without Urian's control, the howling snowstorm swept in all directions, with Mammy Restaurant, which was the closest to the restaurant. Snowflakes struck the faces of the onlookers, and it was a little painful. Snowflakes made a rustling sound as if they were going to shatter the glass, and everyone retreated in a disheveled manner in an attempt to find shelter from the snowstorm. Amy's eyes narrowed slightly as she yelled in a huff. A few snowflakes had landed on her little face, and she glanced sideways at a snowflake that had landed on the corner of her lips. After a moment of hesitation, she stuck out her little tongue to lick it, and her eyes immediately lit up. It's cold and delicious. Upon hearing Amy's voice, Crassus and Julian stopped in their tracks at the same time. The violent snowstorm abruptly subsided, and the flames on Crassus' body also subsided significantly. Today's battle had started because they wanted to take Amy as their disciple. Although they had completely exploded because of the tofu pudding taste, in the end, they still wanted to take Amy as their disciple. Both of them were well aware of this, so gaining Amy's favor was more important than anything else. The two of them were evenly matched in strength, so they naturally had to put their hearts and minds into the fight. Therefore, their ability to control the field was naturally reduced by a lot. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't hurt the onlookers in such a situation. Who knew if a fireball accidentally went off course and smashed into the restaurant? That would be really bad. The two of them looked at each other with wariness in their eyes, and neither of them had any intention of continuing the battle. There were simply too many onlookers. Although it was still early in the morning, the Aiden Square was bustling with people all day long. At this moment, there were already hundreds of people gathered around the restaurant, all of them standing on their tiptoes and craning their necks to see what was going on. Upon hearing that it was a battle between great magic casters, they thought that it would be fine if there were more people, so they squeezed forward as if their lives depended on it. The two of them didn't hold back in the slightest, and if they were the slightest bit careless and threw a spell off course, then a large number of people would die. In Chaos City, death was no small matter. Even though they were both 10th-tier magic casters, not many people could kill them. However, it was clearly unrealistic for them to continue teaching Amy magic here. And judging from Amy's angry expression, it seemed that she was really angry. If neither of them were willing to take him as their master, then the loss would outweigh the gain. Sweet tofu pudding is the best. Crassus hesitated for a moment before withdrawing his staff. He looked at Amy, and said, "Amy, don't you think so? Savory tofu pudding is the real delicacy." Urian's hoarse voice also sounded, and a series of cracking sounds rang out as half of the ice shattered, and ice shards fell all over the ground. The customers surrounding the restaurant's entrance parted to the sides, and even the people who came to watch the fun looked at Remi. They originally expected the two great magicians to fight until the sky darkened and the earth darkened. They didn't expect that halfway through the fight, they would stop because of a little girl's words. They all looked at Remi with some curiosity, trying to guess her identity. "I think both of them are delicious. The savory tofu pudding can be eaten with ruggiamo. It's salty and delicious, and the sweet tofu pudding is especially delicious after a meal. Why are you fighting over it?" Amy looked at the two of them with a perplexed expression on her little face. "You like both of them?" Crassus and Julian had prepared to refute each other's words, but they swallowed them back. They looked at Amy, and didn't know what to say for a moment. These two great magicians are actually fighting over the taste of a dish in this restaurant. The onlookers were all surprised to hear this, and their eyes immediately lit up as they looked at Amy's. In terms of appearance, this restaurant was definitely the most beautiful in the Aiden Square. They had no idea when such a beautiful restaurant had opened in this corner of the Aiden Square. Moreover, to be able to make two great mags fight over a dish, it also made everyone curious. What kind of dish could provoke such a dispute? A small restaurant couldn't afford to hire two great mags to advertise, let alone to make such a big fuss. What was even more surprising was that the two of them, who seemed to be at loggerheads with each other, actually stopped their quarrel because of Remi's words. They seemed to care a lot about the half-elf girl's opinion, which made them even more confused. They stopped. Basil was also taken aback. He had been prepared for this corner of the Aiden Square to be completely destroyed, and this incident could escalate to a 6th-tier one. He didn't expect the fight to stop just like that, and he and the other two members of the Grey Temple didn't know what to do. Amy looked at the two of them, and nodded earnestly. "Yes, Father's tofu pudding is super delicious. I love both the savory and the sweet ones." Amy nodded. She clenched her little fists, and said, "Also, next time you fight, you have to go further away. Don't fight in the restaurant, or I'll get angry. If I get angry, I'll burn you with a fireball. Half-beard grandpa, if you don't want the other half of your beard to be burned, you have to be careful. Otherwise, I'll have to call you beardless grandpa from now on." Crassus reflexively put a hand over his beard. He had been growing and maintaining it for 30 years, and he had always treasured it. He didn't think that half of it would be burned by Amy's fireball a few days ago, and now that she was threatening to burn the other half, he was naturally a little nervous. However, he still forced a smile onto his face as he looked at Amy, and said, "Little Amy, did you see how I destroyed that frost dragon with my staff? That's true magic. It combines the magic system with the body to construct a brand new magic system. If you learn my magic, you'll be able to do the same. You'll be far more powerful and difficult to deal with than a knight. Mph, someone like you won't even be able to fly." Julian curled his lips and looked at Amy. He said with some temptation, "Little girl, if you learn my magic, you'll be able to summon a frost dragon like that one sooner or later. You'll also be able to control an area to make it snow. You'll also be able to have countless clones that look exactly the same. It'll be super fun." Everyone's eyes widened when they saw this scene. They originally thought that these two would be arrogant masters, but they didn't expect that they would stop fighting just because of Amy's words. Now, they even started to promote themselves. This situation made everyone a little confused for a moment. Powerful melee magic and ice magic that can summon a frost dragon. This choice is really a bit of a headache. Everyone looked at Julian and Crassus. They had seen the battle between the two before, and although there was no clear winner, their strength was deeply ingrained in everyone's hearts. It was like two dishes with different styles, but both were exceptionally delicious. If they had to choose, they would also have a headache. Chapter 131. This was probably the answer that everyone had thought of, but no one dared to say it out loud. They were two great magicians above the 9th tier, and one was a royal magician, while the other was a mysterious dark magician. Judging from their previous exchange, it was not an exaggeration to say that they were like fire and water. Who would have thought that Amy would want to learn both magicians without much thought? Crassus and Julian were also taken aback, but surprisingly, neither of them was in a hurry to refute or reject her. They looked at each other with complicated expressions. 20 years ago, the elven girl clapped her hands and said the same thing. After that, the two of them fought for almost a year, but neither of them was convinced. Before they could determine a winner, the elven girl was taken away. Although neither of them said anything about it afterward, it was undeniable that this was probably one of the things that they regretted the most. Because neither of them was the master, they did not even have the right to stand up and stop the two of them. I think this is great. I can learn the flying magic from Halfbeard Grandpa, and I can also learn the magic from Turtleshell Grandpa, which can make dragons appear. I'm sure I'll be super powerful in the future. Amy clapped her hands, and said with a happy smile on her face. Actually, I think you only need to learn one of my magicians. As long as you can learn my magic, you'll be able to knock the head of a dragon at will. There's no need for any extra magic. You only need to learn the fireball spell. You can smash a dragon like that down from the sky with a single fireball spell. Crassus tried to persuade her. It's not nice for a girl to fly around with a big stick. If you learn my magic, it'll be fine even if you wear a skirt. They won't even be able to touch the corner of your clothes. How elegant. That's what a girl should look like. Julian also tried to soften his voice as much as possible. Meg's lips curled up slightly. He could see the possibility of a compromise from Julian and Crassus' faces. Sure enough, it was best for Amy to bring this up herself. Moreover, both of them really did want to take Amy as their disciple. If Amy could mediate the conflict between them, it would be a good thing. After all, at her age, she probably did not have many old friends in this world. I want to learn both of your magicians. Please. Amy shook her head, and looked at the two of them pitifully with her big, watery eyes. Crassus and Julian looked at Amy, and suddenly felt their hearts soften. It was as if they had seen that little elven girl who usually had a sharp tongue, but when she acted coy. It was just that Remi was a bit younger, and she had a venomous tongue as well. She couldn't even bring herself to reject her when she looked at her like that, so she just nodded her head. Is that so? Grandpa Turtleshell, Grandpa Halfbeard, are you really going to teach me magic together? Amy's eyes suddenly lit up. She hugged Meg and kissed him on the cheek. She said happily, Father, Amy has two masters now. Masters who can teach Amy magic. Crassus came back to his senses and nodded. He opened his mouth to say something. Hello, Master Halfbeard. Amy turned around and called out to Crassus in a crisp voice. Crassus was stunned for a moment. When he saw the smile on Amy's face, he swallowed the rest of his words. The corners of his mouth twitched, but he still managed to squeeze out a smile. He nodded and replied, Okay. But. Julian raised his eyebrows. Hello, Master Turtleshell. Amy also turned to look at Julian. After thinking for a moment, she said with a smile, In that case, can I play with green bean and charcoal every day? Julian looked at the smiling Amy with a conflicted expression on his face. In the end, he nodded, and said in a hoarse voice, Yes, you can. That's great. I'm so happy. Amy clapped her little hands. Little stars appeared in her eyes. She was full of longing and anticipation. If she learned from Grandpa Halfbeard's magic, she would be able to fly. If she learned from Grandpa Turtleshell's magic, she would be able to make it snow and summon a giant dragon. So, does that mean they've agreed? The onlookers didn't dare to make a sound from the beginning to the end. They didn't expect that the two great magicians who were fighting in full swing would become the master of the same little girl in the blink of an eye. Moreover, it was a little half-elf girl who seemed to be the daughter of the restaurant's owner. Mr. Mac, what do you think of this matter? Crassus turned to look at Meg, who hadn't said a word. In this matter, Meg played a decisive role. I respect Amy's choice. I can't deny that both of you are powerful magic casters. However, I hope that both of you can fulfill the promise you made in the restaurant. This is my only condition. Meg looked at the two of them with a serious expression. The only condition he had was actually a lot of demands. Sly old fox. Julian and Crassus looked at Meg, and these words flashed through their minds at the same time. That was the condition they had proposed when they were competing with each other. Now that both of them had agreed to take in disciples at the same time, Meg actually wanted them to follow the same condition. He was simply displaying his businessman nature to the extreme. However, judging from Meg's expression, there was no room for negotiation. With a talented and adorable daughter, he could really do whatever he wanted. Although I hate that my disciple has another master, I respect her choice. It's a pity that she has bad taste. From tomorrow onwards, she will learn from you for 3 days, and from me for 3 days, and rest for 1 day. I've agreed to all the conditions you proposed. Julian raised his hand, and the rest of the ice statues were all shattered. He slowly walked out from the corner, and looked at Julian coldly. Also, tofu pudding is the best when it's salty. If Amy didn't want to learn your fancy tricks, do you think I'd be willing to take in the same disciple as you? 3 days is fine. The time will be according to the restaurant's break time. I've also agreed to all the conditions you proposed. Crassus also extinguished the fire on his magician's staff. He pointed his staff at Julian and said seriously, tofu pudding is the best when it's sweet. If you don't like it, come and fight me at any time. Meg put Amy on the ground with a smile. He glanced at the clock in the restaurant, and nodded at the two. Okay. In that case, Amy's class will start tomorrow. The restaurant is open for business. If you two want to eat, you can have breakfast before you leave. 2 plates of Yangju fried rice. Oh, and a Ruggiamo today. Crassus walked into the restaurant first. 1 for each, Julian said as he looked at Crassus back and thought for a while. He also walked into the restaurant. Captain, what should we do now? A member of the Grey Temple whispered to Beza. Because the battle was short, the square was not badly damaged, and there were no casualties. Only 2 small trees were damaged in the battle. The destruction was not as destructive as the battle between the 2 orcs 2 days ago. Chapter 132. Mag took a glance at Beza before quickly averting his gaze. He turned to the customers standing at the entrance of the restaurant with a smile, and said, "Sorry for the fright, everyone. The restaurant is already open for business. Please come in." It was normal for people from the Grey Temple to come. After all, they were in charge of maintaining order in Chaos City, and it was inevitable that they would have to deal with them after opening the restaurant. However, Meg didn't want them to pay too much attention to him. After all, they were such a powerful force. If they investigated seriously, they might find out something he didn't want them to know, such as his relationship with Meg Alex. Of course, even if Mag Alex's closest friends and family were standing right in front of him, they would still find it very difficult to believe that the great general who could slay dragons with a heavy sword had now become a chef who could cook one delicacy after another with a kitchen knife. "Mr. Mac, you're awesome." Prole gave Mag a thumbs up and walked in with admiration. He had been scared out of his wits when he saw the battle just now, but Mag, the one who had started it, could negotiate with 2 great magic casters calmly. He didn't back down at all. Both of them were selling themselves, but the difference between them was obvious. Meg sighed in his heart. What could he do? It was different from his previous life. If Julian could pay for Amy's meals, it would be a lot of money. He was in a hurry to save up for strength points. Money was really important. With money, one could really do anything. At least, that was the case for the system. By the way, system, each strength point will cost 10,000 gold coins, right? Meg suddenly asked curiously in his heart. The price of the next strength point will be announced after the first strength point is purchased, the system's voice sounded. System, you're not trying to cheat me, are you? Meg narrowed his eyes. He felt that there was more to the system's words. It seemed that it wanted to raise the price again. System, please complete the mission as soon as possible and upgrade the restaurant. After upgrading the restaurant, you'll have a higher chance of receiving strength points as a reward. The system avoided Mag's question, and fell completely silent after that. You win. Meg sighed in his heart. The system was willing to do anything to upgrade the restaurant. It cost 50,000 gold coins to upgrade the restaurant to level 2, which was 5 million copper coins. The restaurant's turnover yesterday was the highest in history. It sold 500 rugiamos and 100 plates of Yeongju fried rice. After deducting the cost of ingredients, the profit was 1,400 gold coins. It would take at least a month to save enough money. Fortunately, this upgrade cost 50,000 gold coins in addition to the cost of food, and not 50,000 gold coins directly. Hence, the cost of purchasing physique points should also be included. Mag glanced at the task of 1,000 customers. The progress bar showed that the number of rugiamos sold yesterday had increased a lot, and the restaurant was becoming more and more famous because of the word of mouth. More and more customers were coming to the restaurant, and they were contributing to the increase in the number of customers. This restaurant looks good. There are so many people waiting in line for a meal so early in the morning, and 2 great magic casters are fighting over the taste of the dishes. It seems worth a try, a young man in a tight suit said to himself as he walked towards the restaurant. It's rare to come to this corner of the Aiden Square. I didn't expect to see a restaurant here. Let's try it. A middle-aged woman in a fancy dress looked up and down at the restaurant, and then followed the young man into the restaurant. Many onlookers chose to follow Crassus and Julian into the restaurant after the show ended. They were curious about what this restaurant, which had appeared quietly in this corner of the Aiden Square, sold. I'm so angry. This fellow has lured the customers away again. Those 2 fellows didn't even pay for my 2 bowls of noodles, and they even took my bowls away. At the entrance of a certain noodle shop, the lady boss stood with her hands on her hips as she glared in the direction of Mammy Restaurant. Who the hell is this owner? I can't believe he can think of such a way to attract customers. 2 great magic casters. How enviable. A fat owner stood in front of the bun shop, looking around enviously. The restaurant opened early in the morning, and only 3 buns had been sold. Basil, what's the situation now? Not long after, an old man with grey-white hair rode over on a horse. He glanced at the snow-covered area, dismounted, and asked Beza. Brandley, you're here. Basil hurried over and took the reins. This old man was a respected 7th-tier magic caster from the Grey Temple. He lowered his voice and said, the battle is over. The damage to the square was limited, and there were no casualties. The 2 sides have reached a truce, and now they're in this restaurant for breakfast. So soon. Brandley was a little surprised. He had just received news of a 5th-tier incident, and he had immediately come here on the horse of the guard who had delivered the news. He was worried that Basil wouldn't be able to control the situation. The residual magic waves left behind at the scene were quite alarming to him. The snow was over 20 centimeters deep, the ground was littered with ice shards, and the ground had been crushed into a deep crater. The 3 tornadoes had left behind such damage in such a short time, and it was quite clear that the 2 magic casters involved in the conflict were far more powerful than he was. Who were they? Brandley asked with a hint of fear in his eyes. 2 old men. One of them is wearing a white robe and a short beard, and is wielding a magic staff. What's strange is that he doesn't use magic to attack from afar. Instead, he chooses to engage in melee combat. The other one is wearing a black robe, and is an ice magic caster. He summoned a frost dragon. Basil quickly recounted what had happened. The one in the white robe is Master Crassus. I heard that he came to Chaos City a few days ago, but I didn't think that he would get into a conflict here today. Brandley was a little surprised. His brows furrowed as he mused. Master Crassus ranks among the top 3 in the Magus Tower, yet that black-robed magic caster is able to hold his own against him. Black robe, ice magic, hunchback, could it be? Brandley's eyes widened as he looked into the restaurant nervously. What's wrong? Basil turned to Brandley with a perplexed expression. Seeing as there are no casualties, we don't have to worry about this. Tell them not to send reinforcements. Don't clean up the plaza, and stay away from this corner today. Brandley shook his head, and didn't explain any further. All right. Basil was a little confused, but he didn't ask any questions. He could tell from Brandley's expression that this wasn't something that they could intervene in. He gave some instructions to the two guards beside him, and stood off to the side in silence. Could it really be the Lord of Ice, Julian? I didn't think that the two legendary magic casters would meet again. I wonder who will emerge victorious in this clash of ice and fire, Brandley thought to himself, and his heart was suddenly filled with excitement. Chapter 133. Even though Brandley was now a senior in the eyes of many of the younger magic casters, the battle between Crassus and Julian had been the most exciting thing to the magic casters of the Norland continent when they were young. It was a duel between long-range and melee attacks. Should a mage be a melee or a long-range attacker? Because of this, there were two completely different factions. Every duel between the two of them attracted a lot of attention. Unfortunately, Julian suddenly disappeared 20 years ago, and the battle between fire and ice that had lasted for close to 100 years was cut short. It had become one of the greatest regrets of the older magic casters. However, according to Basil's description, Brandley was almost certain that the battle between fire and ice had reappeared after 20 years. He just didn't think that it would take place in Chaos City, and that the battle would only last for such a short time. Of course, what was even more surprising to him was that the two of them had gone to the same restaurant for breakfast after the battle. Brandley hesitated momentarily before turning to Basil, and asking, why did they start fighting? From what I've heard, it seems to be because of the taste of a mysterious dish called tofu pudding. A peculiar expression appeared on Basil's face. He paused momentarily before adding, in the end, they both took in the daughter of the owner of this restaurant as their disciple. How is that possible? Brandley exclaimed, but quickly realized that he had lost his composure. He shook his head with disbelief, and said, impossible. How could the Lord of Ice and the Lord of Fire have the same disciple? If you're sure that those two are the ones you're talking about, then that is indeed the case. Basil didn't understand why Brandley was so agitated all of a sudden, but he still nodded. Brandley quickly calmed down, and said to Basil, you can leave now. If it really is those two, then even the Lord of the Norland Palace has to treat them as equals. We can't afford to mess with them. Get someone to come and fix the square tomorrow. Don't let this matter spread. All right. Basil nodded, and waved a hand, and his two subordinates quickly left. Brandley looked in the direction of the restaurant, and hesitated momentarily before adjusting his magician's robe. Like a little girl who was going to meet her idol, he walked toward the entrance of the restaurant with a hint of nervousness and anticipation. The door of the restaurant was pushed open, and the bell hanging on the door made a crisp sound. The restaurant was almost full. His gaze passed through the crowd and finally landed on the two innermost tables near the counter. There were two people sitting with their backs facing the door. One of them had a short white beard and was wearing a white mage robe, while the other had a hunchback and was wearing a black mage robe. The people around them didn't sit at those two tables. Those two should be ice and fire, right? Brandley stopped in his tracks and looked at the two figures from behind with tears welling up in his eyes. These two people almost represented an era of magic. Who would have thought that they would be able to sit together and have breakfast, even if they were not at the same table? If this news were to spread, many mags of their generation would probably find it hard to believe. Looks like this is the little half-elf girl. Brandley's gaze fell on Amy as he thought to himself. He pulled out a chair and sat down before opening the menu and randomly ordering a dish. Miss Mia, I'm here again. Sargeras gently pushed open the door of the restaurant with Keel and Mond, and looked at Yarbemia with a bashful smile. Welcome, Yarbemia nodded with a smile, and looked at Sargeras. Do you still want Ruggiamo? This demon had left a deep impression on her during the past 2 days. Although his big bald head and lava patterns were a little frightening, he had a good personality. He always had a smile on his face, and he only ate Ruggiamo. Yes, I want 5 more Ruggiamos, and 3 for each of them. Sargeras nodded with a bashful smile. Okay, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded and walked to the kitchen. The restaurant was almost full now, and only the table by the door was empty. It was Sargera's favorite seat. This half-dragon girl's smile is so beautiful, Keel said with a smile. It was the first time he had seen such a pure smile. Yes, she's beautiful, too. Much prettier than the women in our tribe. Mond nodded. He pulled out a chair and was about to sit down when he looked at the iron chair in Sargeras's hand. Boss, aren't there chairs in the restaurant? Why did you bring a chair? You'll know in a while. Remember, when the dishes are served, you too have to stand while eating. If you break anything in the restaurant, you too won't be able to pay for it. Sargeras smiled mysteriously, and warned them seriously at the same time. Okay. Keel and Mond didn't know why, but since Sargeras said so, they did as they were told. After all, they had been like this for many years. The customers nearby watched the 3 demons sit down. Those who came here for the first time were a little nervous and wanted to squeeze to the side, but the regulars were already used to it. This demon came to the restaurant at least twice a day, and each time he sat at the door. After eating, he would emit flames all over his body, which was very impressive. But other than that, he had always behaved himself and never had any conflicts with anyone. Big Baldy, keep your voice down in the restaurant, okay? Just then, a soft voice came from the direction of the counter. The restaurant quieted down immediately, and many people looked at Sargeras. Even Crassus and Julian looked over. Where did this little Keel's thick eyebrows furrowed, and he was about to stand up. Shut up. Sargeras covered his mouth with his big hand. He smiled at Amy, who was sitting at the counter, and said, Okay, I'll be careful. Amy was holding Ugly Duckling in her arms. Her eyes lit up when she saw Sargeras and the other 2 demons at the door. Did Big Baldy bring Baldy 2 and Baldy 3 here? I don't mind if you call them that. Sargeras nodded with a smile. Okay, then I'll call them that. Amy nodded happily. The 3 big bald heads were like 3 big lanterns. Sargeras let go of Keel's hand. He looked at Keel, who was about to say something, and said in a low voice, If you think your head is harder than that dragon's, you can say everything you want to say. Keel's eyes widened, and he immediately swallowed the rest of his words. He secretly looked back at Amy, who was happily playing with a cat and a bird behind the counter. Boss, is that the restaurant owner's daughter you were talking about? He whispered. Yes, she should be that magic caster's disciple now. Sargeras nodded. Even he didn't dare to mess with that girl. I can't mess with her. Mond swallowed. If that girl was really that magic caster's disciple, messing with her would be suicide. Chapter 134. Julian looked at the young Jew fried rice in front of him and frowned. He looked hesitant. He couldn't remember how long it had been since he last ate meat. 30 years. Or 50 years. Or was it when he was 20 years old and saw a group of ogres eating an entire village of villagers? Although those disgusting fellows were frozen into ice by him in the end, many years later, he still killed his way to the ogre tribe on Demon Island and almost exterminated the entire ogre tribe. But that scene was still replaying in his mind even after 100 years. He still felt uncomfortable when he saw meat. But strangely, when he saw the ham in the young Jew fried rice today, he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. The aroma of eggs mixed with the smell of other ingredients made him feel restless. One had to know that he usually ate plain boiled vegetables. Occasionally, he would boil an egg, which was already considered a meat dish. He couldn't bear to see a trace of meat or fish. Facing such a plate of oily eggs mixed with all kinds of messy ingredients, he actually had the idea of eating it, which made him feel a little incredulous. He followed Crassus into the restaurant because he didn't want to be close to Amy before Crassus could. Do you want to try it? Julian hesitated. Boss, another plate of young Jew fried rice. Your young Jew fried rice is so delicious. A young man sitting next to him put down his spoon. He had already finished his plate of young Jew fried rice, and his face was full of satisfaction. Okay, please wait a moment, Yabemia replied with a smile and turned to enter the kitchen. Is it really that good? Julian glanced at the young man. There wasn't even a grain of rice left on the plate. It was as if the plate had been licked clean. Master Turtle Shell, don't you like rainbow fried rice? Amy looked at Julian and asked doubtfully. That guy can't eat meat. I guess he hasn't tasted meat for 100 years. Crassus, who had already eaten half a bowl of Yangju fried rice, looked at Julian with pity. He knew a little about what happened in the past. He was also on the Demon Islands when the cannibals were exterminated. Most of the survivors who escaped died at his hands. He did not hate demons, but there was no need for demons that specialized in feeding on humans to survive in this world. Even if the race war ended, those guys would definitely not stop. The battle between ice and fire had attracted a lot of attention on the Norland continent. Everyone thought that the two of them were sworn enemies who would kill each other as soon as they met. However, how many people knew that the two of them had worked together to do a few things that no one knew about? The annihilation of the ogres had always been an unsolved mystery. If you can't eat meat, you'll be so pitiful. Amy looked at Julian pitifully. Who said I can't eat meat? Being looked at with pity by Julian and Amy, Julian's blood boiled. He grabbed the spoon next to him and dug a spoonful from the middle. When he reached his mouth, he stopped. The tantalizing aroma wafted into his nose. Julian's appetite had been awakened by the delicious bowl of tofu pudding. He looked at Amy, who was full of expectation, and gritted his teeth. He opened his mouth and ate the fried rice. How can it taste like this? Meat can be so delicious. Julian's eyes widened. The egg wrapped around the rice almost melted in his mouth. After biting into the ham that had been marinated for many years, the savory and fragrant gravy flowed out. Julian, who could not remember the taste of meat at all, felt all his taste buds awaken at once. They were cheering and welcoming the return of their king. Although they were only a few grains of rice, the deep and special taste shocked Crassus like never before. It awakened the strongest feeling in the depths of his heart. He suddenly remembered something. Before that incident, he was a person who couldn't be without meat. In addition to the ham, the shrimp mixed with the freshness of the sea, the rice-sized mushrooms, winter bamboo shoots, and chives. The taste was so delicious and harmonious that it brought wave after wave of taste buds that had been dormant for a long time to the top of the clouds. What surprised him even more was the faint fragrance of the spring of life contained in the rice. Those who had never tasted the spring of life might think it was just some kind of seasoning, but he had tasted it before. He just didn't expect Meg to be able to get his hands on the spring of life and add it to the dish just like that. Ah! Julian couldn't help but exclaim after swallowing a mouthful of Yangju fried rice. His attention was completely attracted by the bowl of Yangju fried rice in front of him. He scooped another spoonful into his mouth, one mouthful after another. He couldn't stop at all. Turtle Grandpa seems to be eating very happily. He doesn't seem to dislike it. Amy also smiled. I can only say that Mr. Mac's food is too delicious. Crassus was also a little surprised. He didn't expect that Julian, who had never eaten meat, would really eat the Yangju fried rice with ham in it. And from the looks of it, he was completely addicted to it. But on second thought, when he was in Rodu, he could only eat half a bowl of rice. After coming here, he had 2 bowls of Yangju fried rice for every meal, which was the same as Julian's. Ding! The spoon touched the plate and made a soft sound. Julian was stunned for a moment. Then he realized that he had finished the Yangju fried rice. He actually finished a bowl of food with meat in it, and he didn't feel any nausea after eating it. He even had the urge to eat another bowl. Julian didn't know how many years he hadn't had this feeling. His heart couldn't help but beat faster. He couldn't help but look at the rugiamo on the side. This was also a dish he had never seen before. The white bread was cut in the middle and stuffed with minced meat. When Julian first saw this dish, he rejected it in his heart. It was too greasy and full of meat. But after eating the Yangju fried rice, he suddenly had a strong desire for meat. The minced ham in the Yangju fried rice couldn't satisfy him anymore. This rugiamo was obviously more suitable. This taste. Will it be different from the meat I ate before? Julian was a little hesitant as he reached for the Ruggiamo. The rich aroma of the braised meat wafted to his face. It was indeed different from the ham, but it was just as tempting. He couldn't help but take a bite. Some braised meat sauce had seeped into the soft Baiji bread. It was sweet with a little salty taste. The soft braised meat almost melted in his mouth. Although it was a mixture of fat and lean meat, it didn't feel greasy at all. The rich sauce oozed out of the meat and completely ignited the restless taste buds. It was like a carnival. The aroma of the meat wreaked havoc in his mouth, and then turned into a violent breath that rushed into his body. Ah! Julian couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Looking at the Ruggiamo in his hand, his eyes lit up. His blood was gushing, and his heart was beating wildly. This was the feeling of being young. At that time, he also liked to run around in a white robe, thinking that he was a righteous and lucky magician, a hero. Starting from today, at least 4 chapters, but the number of subscriptions these days is a little low. Where is the motivation to publish more chapters? It's said that Chijien gave out a lot of free coins. Don't tell me people are using the free coins to subscribe. Free coins to subscribe. Whisper doesn't get a penny, and the average subscription rate doesn't increase. The new books are dying out. This is a little embarrassing. From today on, Whisper promises to publish more chapters. If she's healthy, she'll keep publishing until the end of the month. Can you also promise me that you won't use the free coins to subscribe to the restaurant? Chapter 135. Julian finished the Ruggiamo. Holding the empty bag, he stared blankly for a long time before he let out a long sigh of relief. It was good to be young. Unfortunately, they were all old. A smile appeared on Julian's wrinkled face. Even his hunched back seemed to straighten a little. He felt warm all over, as if he was basking in the warm winter sun. Although he was known as the Lord of Ice, his legs had been a little inconvenient since he was 30 years old because he didn't protect himself well when he learned ice magic when he was 40 years old. It was the same reason why he started to hunch his back when he was 40 years old. Every once in a while, he would suffer from unbearable pain. Although the Ruggiamo wasn't very effective, it did have a soothing effect. It would be better if it could be a little hotter. Also, he tasted a hint of the berserk mist in it. He had been to that island before. The effect was similar, but different. It should be said that it was an improved version of the berserk mist. The berserk mist didn't harm the mind, but it could stimulate the wild nature and instincts hidden in the depths of the body. It didn't have much effect on humans, and it should be even weaker on elves. However, it should be very effective on races like orcs and demons. It could even stimulate evolution. Moreover, this thing could be addictive. Just then, a light suddenly came from the direction of the restaurant's entrance. At the same time, there was an uproar. Urian turned to discover flames rising from the bodies of the 3 lava demons standing at the entrance of the restaurant. There was red lava flowing slowly within the lava patterns on their bodies, and the light from the flames lit up the restaurant slightly. Even the temperature had risen slightly, creating quite a frightening sight to behold. Mr. Mac is indeed a genius. But such a genius is willing to spend 4 years in poverty. Is it because he has been accumulating strength, or is he hiding from something? He's an interesting person. Julian looked away. He glanced at Meg in the kitchen and Amy, who was looking at the entrance in surprise. He shook his head with a smile. Well, no matter what secret he's hiding, since he's Amy's father and can make such delicious food, let him hide it. The customers sitting at the entrance were so scared that they leaned to the side. They looked at the 3 lava demons in confusion. What's going on? Why did the 3 of them suddenly enter battle mode while they were eating? Could it be that the food was not to his taste and he wanted to smash the restaurant? There were too many types of demons, and many of them were warlike. At least half of the conflicts in Chaos City were related to demons, so many of the customers who came to the restaurant for the first time were still a little scared. Some of the guests who were about to enter the restaurant stopped in their tracks and even took a few steps back, worried that they would be implicated. Most of the regulars were used to Sajara's sitting in front of the door with his own chair and eating his Ruggiamo quietly. Now that there were 2 burning lava trolls, they weren't affected at all. Sargeras was still sitting on the iron chair, calmly chewing the Ruggiamo in his hand. He felt his blood rushing against the shackles, and his flesh and blood seemed to be in a carnival. This feeling intoxicated him, and he was a little addicted. He looked up at Keel and Mond, who were standing stiffly with Ruggiamos in their hands, and a smile appeared on his face. Just as he had expected, the Ruggiamos were effective on the lava race as well. The lava trolls couldn't make a breakthrough, which was the main reason why they had been weakening in the past 1,000 years. It was especially difficult for lava trolls of low bloodline levels to make a breakthrough once. Sargeras had made 3 breakthroughs under such circumstances, and was already the most talented and powerful member of the younger generation of lava trolls. Keel and Mond had only made 1 breakthrough, but they were already the main warriors of the lava trolls. This. It's burning. Keel's fat was trembling all over, and his face was filled with surprise and fear. His blood was running wildly in his veins like a runaway horse, and it seemed that every piece of his flesh was trembling. This was a feeling he had never experienced before. He was a little panicked. However, what surprised him was that he could clearly feel the shackle that had been dormant for decades. Furthermore, under the impact of the violent blood, it was like a small boat in a storm. It seemed like it could break through at any moment. And all this was because he had eaten a mouthful of the Ruggiamo in his hand. Keel raised his hand. The craft paper on the Ruggiamo was already burning in the fire. He hurriedly tore off the bag, and then took a bite of the remaining half of the Ruggiamo in his hand. It's so delicious, Keel thought. He didn't know how to describe it. He had never eaten anything so delicious before. Just one taste was enough for him to feel that his life as a demon was complete. Boss, following you was the right choice. He stuffed the rest of the Ruggiamo into his mouth, and chewed happily with a joyful expression on his face. Sargeras nodded. You're right. You're right. You're right. Seeking a breakthrough had been the curse and mission of the lava trolls for 1,000 years. So many of them had wandered outside just to break this curse. Therefore, when Sargeras said that he had found a way to make a breakthrough, the entire tribe, which consisted of only the old, the weak, the women, the children, and a few warriors, were all excited. The 2 of them had set off overnight, and traveled day and night to Chaos City. They had thought that there would be some miraculous way to make a breakthrough, but it turned out to be to eat Ruggiamo. Well, it should be said that this way of making a breakthrough was even more miraculous. They could make a breakthrough just by eating Ruggiamo. Was there a simpler way to make a breakthrough? This was the food that would revive the lava trolls. The lava trolls had been searching for a solution for 1,000 years, and finally found it in this restaurant. Roar. Keel suddenly raised his head and let out a long roar. He spat out a column of golden red flame half a meter high from his mouth, and then suddenly withdrew it. The red flame on the surface of his body showed signs of turning golden. It was a little different from before. Keel, you've made a breakthrough. Mond looked at Keel with a face full of surprise and envy. The 2 of them were the first to break through the first shackle. Who would have thought that Keel would break through first again? Yes. I've finally made a breakthrough. Keel looked at the golden red flame rising from his hands, and raised his hands to try out the power of the bursting flame spell. Idiot. Sargeras stood up and slapped Keel on the head. He laughed angrily. If you use the bursting flame spell here, the 3 of us will probably be lying on our backs today, and we won't be able to enter this restaurant in the future. Chapter 136. Sargeras raised his eyebrows and said, That's what I thought, but then I got hit by a fireball. Sargeras raised an eyebrow, and then glanced at Krasu and Urien, who were sitting in front of him. He pursed his lips, and said, Besides, if you think you can beat those 2 old men, you can try. Keel also glanced at Sargeras. Thinking of that horrible frost dragon and that old man in a white robe who jumped up and smashed a dragon into pieces with his stick, Keel was terrified. He shook his head and said, Then we'd better buy. Seeing that Keel had given up on that stupid idea, Sargeras turned to Mond and asked, How are you doing, Mond? I think I'm going to make a breakthrough, but I'm still short of 2 Ruggiamos, Mond said, nodding after feeling his body carefully. 2 Ruggiamos? Sajaras's eyes lit up, and he praised, "That's a good way to describe it. I think it can be a new name for the power level of our magma people. First level 1 bun, second level 1 bun. Like this." Keel's eyes also lit up. He stood on his tiptoes and patted Mon's shoulder. "That's right. Yes, we can use this method to calculate the power level of a person below third level. Even I don't know how many Rugiamos it takes to make a breakthrough to third level." Sajaras nodded. He thought for a moment and said, "Besides, at our level, human mags and knights are twice as strong. It's a little confusing that a second-level person can beat a fourth-level person. Let's use this method." "Haha, that's good." Mond giggled. He was also very happy. Big bald head, second bald head, and third bald head, don't make too much noise in the restaurant. If you make too much noise, you'll disturb the other customers, and I'll be very angry. Very angry. Amy stared at the three men and waved her little fist, trying to be fierce. Crassus and Julian looked at Sajaras at the same time. Sajaras suddenly felt a lot of pressure. He had been worried about not being able to eat Meg's Rugiamos, but now there were two powerful people behind Amy. He didn't dare to offend them at all. He hurriedly waved at them and said, "Quiet, quiet." Keel and Mond immediately shut their mouths. They weren't angry. Instead, they were filled with excitement. Keel had already made a breakthrough, and Mond would also make a breakthrough after eating 2 more Rugiamos. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before the Lava Clan stood at the top of the Demon Islands again. The customers at the side saw that the 3 demons were chatting happily without any intention of getting angry. Although they were on fire, they were not aggressive. Now, even the tables and chairs at the side were not burned. Now, they were obediently listening to the boss's daughter. It seemed that the safety of the restaurant was not bad. They all heaved a sigh of relief, sat down again, and continued to enjoy the food. The customers standing at the door looked at this scene in disbelief. They didn't expect the little girl to be so intimidating. Even when she was angry, she was still so cute, making people want to pinch her cheeks. This restaurant must be very interesting. This thought flashed across the minds of many customers as they entered the restaurant in high spirits. The regulars also smiled knowingly. They didn't know why, but every time they saw Amy getting angry, they felt inexplicably happy. It had been a long time since they had seen such a cute girl. Sajaras raised his hand, looked at Yarbemia, and said in a weak voice, "Well, we'll have 8 more Rugiamos." "Okay, please wait a moment." Yarbemia nodded with a smile. "This demon is very cute. He consciously upholds the restaurant's rules. Although he looks a little scary, he is very easy to talk to." The restaurant had just opened in the morning, but it was already full. There were no seats left for the customers who came in later. Yarbemia took out a menu and introduced the 2 dishes in the restaurant to them. It was a little strange to eat Yeongju fried rice while standing, but there were Rugiamos in a paper bag outside. They could eat them with their hands. The tempting aroma floating in the air, and the happy expressions on the customers' faces as they ate the food, had already surpassed all advertisements and promotions. However, when the customers saw the price of 600 copper coins or 300 copper coins per serving, they could only turn around and leave silently. Not everyone could afford to eat breakfast, no matter how delicious it was. However, there were still many customers who stayed. Although 300 copper coins was not cheap, it was worth it to try and see if it was really as good as it was said to be. Customers who didn't have the patience to wait for an empty seat directly ordered Rugiamos. "I also want a Rugiamo," said a middle-aged man who looked like the manager of the restaurant. He was wearing a grey-white standard gown. "I want a Rugiamo. Hurry up. I have to go to the shop to change shifts." "I want 2. Maybe my wife will like them." Next to him, a tall and thin man in loose casual clothes with a pair of wooden clogs on his feet scratched his messy hair. Vicenio was kicked out of bed by his wife early in the morning to buy breakfast. He was in a bad mood, but he didn't expect to see the battle between 2 great magic casters. Immediately, he felt that it was not a waste to wake up early. Seeing that the restaurant was good, he decided to buy breakfast on the way back. His wife had 10 shops in the Aden Square, and most of them were close to the exit of the square. She could earn 20,000 to 30,000 gold coins a month just by collecting rent. She was definitely a rich woman. When he had married into her family, he had been crowned as the most powerful man who lived off his wife. Vicenio didn't have much objection to this. Although he was born into a merchant family and had a good family background, as the son of a concubine, those things had nothing to do with him since he was young. Was there anything better than being able to rely on his looks to find a rich woman who was above average in terms of looks? Life, isn't it good to be a landlord who collects money every month? He wasn't the least bit interested in fighting for family property. His current wife was pretty good, except that she wanted more in bed and had a lower status in the family. He could spend his money as long as he didn't fool around outside. Every day, he would go out with a pocket full of money to show off. Unfortunately, he had a little tail following him, so he couldn't go to the brothel. But he didn't regret it. Every day, after paying his taxes at home, he would go out like a saint. Even if a beautiful elf stood naked in front of him, he would probably only take a few glances at her. I feel like my body has been hollowed out. Vicenio yawned. After being tormented the whole night, he thought to himself helplessly, "It seems that I have to find a few more folk remedies." Chapter 137. Brother, you look like you have some kidney deficiency. Mag also noticed Vicenio, who was ordering the food. He was tall and thin, and his loose-fitting clothes made him look even thinner. He was quite handsome, with a high nose bridge. However, his skin was a little sickly pale, and his big eye bags and dark circles reminded Mag of his friends in his previous life who spent all their time with women. No, to be precise, they were his playmates. He was different from them. Mag despised dying on a woman's stomach the most. A man who couldn't even control his lower body couldn't be considered his friend. He didn't have many friends. He seemed to be used to being alone, or rather, he liked to be alone. This young man's condition was really bad. If it went on like this, it wouldn't be long before he was bedridden. Meg withdrew his gaze and focused on the rapidly increasing number of customers in his mind. He couldn't help but smile. The duel between Julian and Crassus had brought a lot of new customers to the restaurant, and the conversion rate was pretty good. At this rate, the 1,000-people mission would be completed by today. If it's braised chicken and rice, Amy would probably like it too. I wonder how it'll turn out this time. Meg was already planning in his mind. The reward for the 1,000-people mission had been given out by the system. It was a recipe for braised chicken and rice. Braised chicken and rice was one of the 3 most famous dishes in China. Naturally, it had its own uniqueness. In his previous life, he had tasted it a few times, and it was indeed very good. Using the ingredients provided by the system and the best cooking skills, Meg was already looking forward to what kind of food would come out of this collision. The baiji bread in both ovens had just been replaced, and no one had ordered the Yangju fried rice yet. Meg gestured for Yarbemia to take a seat while he served the last 2 Ruggiamos. Sargeras stood up and looked at Meg gratefully. "Mr. Mac, thank you very much for the Ruggiamo. I believe we lava demons will become the restaurant's biggest Ruggiamo customer." Keel and Mond hurriedly straightened their clothes and stood aside with serious expressions. Since they couldn't kidnap Meg, they could only buy from him in the future. Besides, the Ruggiamo made by Meg had really helped them a lot. After eating the 3rd Ruggiamo, Mond successfully broke through the 2nd-level shackle. This progress was unprecedented. "You're welcome." Meg nodded with a smile. It was a good thing that Sargeras could bring a steady stream of customers to the restaurant. However, the thought of the lava demons eating the Ruggiamo and turning into torches gave him a headache. It seemed that he would have to ask Sargeras if he could let them eat the Ruggiamo outside. Meg glanced at the 2 lava demons, one tall and one short. The short and fat demon's eyes flashed, which made Meg feel that he must be a shrewd demon. In comparison, the tall and thin demon looked much more honest. He must be a straightforward person. "By the way, let me introduce you. This is Keel, and this is Mond. From today onwards, our mercenary group is officially established." Sargeras pointed at Keel and Mond. After a short pause, he grinned. "It's called the Burning Legion, Keel. Mond. The Burning Legion. Meg raised his eyebrows and looked at the three in disbelief. He suddenly felt a little dazed. Was this some kind of coincidence across time and space, or was it a historical necessity? But, was the Burning Legion established so that they could eat Ruggiamo every day? Meg's expression suddenly became even more strange. He thought to himself, for Ruggiamo. The Burning Legion rushing towards the enemy was so beautiful that it was impossible to look at the struggling Azeroth. The Burning Legion. Both Keel's and Mond's eyes lit up. This was the first time they had heard this name from Sargeras, but they felt a sense of certainty. Was there a more appropriate and domineering name for the lava tribe than this? Goodbye, we'll be back tonight. Sargeras didn't dawdle. He nodded at Meg and grinned at Yarbemia. He paid the bill and turned to leave. Keel and Mond quickly followed. Boss, how did you come up with such a good name like the Burning Legion? Keel asked curiously after they walked out of the door. That's right. This name is really good. It sounds so good. Mond nodded in agreement. His face was filled with excitement. This is the name that Boss Mag suggested. I think it's not bad, so I used it. Sargeras rubbed his big bald head and didn't boast that he was the one who came up with it. Instead, he smiled and said, but since we have already established an army, we should at least have a catchy slogan when we go out in the future, right? What do you guys think we should call it? For the Burning Legion. Mond yelled after thinking for a while. Keel shook his head. I don't think that's good. It's best if the slogan can inspire the soldiers' courage and determination, and even better if it can stimulate their fighting power. Keel, what do you think we should call it? Sargeras asked Keel. Keel was considered smart among the lava demons. He wasn't as simple-minded as the other lava demons. He used to be Sargeras' right-hand man, and he was deeply trusted by Sargeras. For Ruggiamo. Keel yelled as he looked at the two of them with stars in his eyes. For Ruggiamo. Sargeras's and Mond's eyes lit up, and they yelled after him. Good. That's a great slogan. Just listening to it makes my blood boil. Mond nodded and said, looking a little excited. Yes, I think it'll work too. It's settled then. Sargeras also nodded. He patted Keel on the shoulder and said, Keel, you're really smart. From today onwards, you'll be the staff officer of the Burning Legion. Thank you, boss. Keel nodded with a smile. Although the Legion only had the three of them now, he believed that it wouldn't be long before the Legion continued to grow. It would definitely become one of the most powerful legions on the entire continent. When the time came, for Ruggiamo, his slogan was going to resound throughout the entire Norland continent, and he was the one who had uttered those words. Just the thought of it was enough to make one's heart race. For Ruggiamo, the three of them yelled in unison, and laughed heartily. The passers-by were given a fright. They looked at the three strange demons in horror, and quickly walked away. In Gaia Hotel, Sally folded the quilt in half with a serious expression. Her slender fingers smoothed out the wrinkles on the surface of the quilt, and then she folded it into a ball. She gently put it on the bed, but when she put it down, she put some more wrinkles on it. If it weren't for the 10 copper coins, I would tear you apart with my bare hand. Sally clenched her teeth and waved her fist at the quilt. She heaved a sigh, and took out her purse from her waist. She turned it over in her hand. She still had a dozen dragon coins, and a few dozen copper coins. Should I go to that restaurant for another plate of rainbow fried rice? Sally suddenly had an idea as she looked at the money in her hand. Chapter 138. As soon as this thought popped up in her mind, it was as if a demon had been released from a bottle. The delicious taste of the Yangju fried rice slowly rose from the bottom of her heart. Just the aftertaste alone made Sally swallow her saliva. She had just eaten a big bowl of vegetable noodles in the morning. No. If I eat just one serving, then all of the money I've been working for these past few days will be gone. I still have to save money to go to places further away. Sally shook her head vigorously in an attempt to banish this thought from her mind. However, the more she tried to chase it away, the clearer the memories became. The savory ham, the egg that melted in her mouth, and the rice that had the faint fragrance of the spring of life, made her want to go home for the first time. Although her father and those elders who wanted to force her to marry were annoying, her mother was still very kind to her. She suddenly missed the afternoon when she snuggled in her mother's arms and took a nap. If she hadn't run away from home, as the daughter of the honorable head of the family, she wouldn't have needed to fold a quilt. She could never have imagined that tidying up a dozen rooms would only earn her a dozen copper coins. It would have taken her days to earn a single gold coin. "I'm so hungry all of a sudden." Sally lay on her back on the bed, her eyes empty. All she could think about was the bowls of rainbow fried rice. She was like an elf who had lost her dream. "I wonder if the restaurant has new dishes. That girl is so cute." Sally's murmur echoed in the room. At the entrance of the restaurant, Meg looked at the dozen customers standing outside and said with a smile, "I'm sorry. The Ruggiamo this morning was sold out half an hour ago, and the opening hours are over. The restaurant is closed. If you'd like to eat, please come back early next time. Mr. Mac, I just want one bowl of Yeongju fried rice. I overslept this morning. Please make an exception for me. I'm so used to your food that I can't find anything to eat this morning," a tall and thin man begged Meg with a smile. "That's right, Mr. Mac. It took me half an hour to get here. I didn't get to eat the Ruggiamo, but I want at least one bowl of Yeongju fried rice. You won't be so heartless as to let me go home hungry, will you?" a fat man said, looking unhappy. That's right," the other customers also chimed in. Although they didn't make it on time, they all thought that Meg might be afraid of their feelings because there were so many of them. "I'm sorry, the restaurant strictly follows the opening hours, so please go back." Meg's head without any hesitation. He turned over the sign on the door, looked at the customers who still wanted to talk, and spread his hands. "If I make you Yeongju fried rice now, I won't be able to prepare the ingredients for the lunch. That's not fair, please. Please come earlier." "All right, then I'll come back for lunch." The tall and skinny man saw that Mag had no intention of relenting, so he had no choice but to leave. "Mr. Mac, you're a man of principle." The fat man took a look at Amy, who was walking slowly behind Meg with Ugly Duckling in her arms. He laughed awkwardly, turned around, and got into the carriage that was parked not far away. Seeing that Meg didn't want to negotiate, the other customers had no choice but to leave. Mr. Mac was indeed very strict when it came to the restaurant's rules. Mr. Mac is really different from other restaurant owners. Yarbemir stood at the door and looked at Meg's profile. Under the sunlight, his thin and handsome face looked very amiable. The mustache on his lips made him look more mature. "I'm so lucky to have such a boss." Meg stretched himself. He had sold more than 200 Ruggiamos this morning, and the number of customers had increased to 95. That was more than what he usually got in a day. He could imagine that there would be even more customers at noon and in the evening. The restaurant was officially full. "Father, can we listen to the Mushroom Fairy's new song today?" Amy asked Meg expectantly, holding Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meg was about to close the door and answer Amy's question when a weak voice came from afar. "Mr. Mac, wait." Meg looked in the direction of the voice and saw a delicate figure running toward him from afar. A pair of wooden clogs clicked on the ground, and the loose clothes billowed like waves on the small body. It looked as if the wind would blow him away at any time. It was Vicenio, who had just bought 2 Ruggiamos. "Sir, I'm sorry, but the restaurant is closed." Meg shook his head with a strange expression as he looked at Vicenio, who had trotted all the way to him and was bending over with his hands on his knees. It had only been less than an hour, and the young man's face was even paler than before. When he ran over, his steps were so light that he was almost floating. He was probably as weak as Meg. However, in comparison, Meg was not as strong, and he was a little thin, but his complexion and spirit were good, and his eyes were bright and spirited. Vicenio, on the other hand, looked so dispirited that he would fall at the slightest touch. God knew what had happened to him in the past hour. "You're not selling them?" Vicenio's voice rose a little, and he seemed a little disappointed. However, his eyes soon lit up, and he nodded with lingering fear. "That's good. That's good." Meg looked at him in confusion. What's wrong with him? Why did his words seem to come out of nowhere? "Mr. Mac, Help, help me. Vicenio reached out his hand to Meg, but halfway through, his legs gave out, and he knelt down in front of him. Sir, there are more Ruggiamos for sale at noon. Even if you can't eat them in the morning, you don't have to be so polite. They're really sold out. Meg was stunned. He looked at Vicenio, who was kneeling in front of him, and silently withdrew his hand with a strange expression. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.